Chapter 221. Wyrm was a little concerned. After all, when Erica mentioned names, only Huina of the Clear Autumn Courtyard called her by her surname, while the others called her by her first name. You can't say that we're not on good terms. It's her fault for always wanting to defeat me, the first wife, to obtain the position of first wife. Her Highness Alice is clearly the first wife. Erica waved her hand helplessly. Back then, when Huina of the Clear Autumn Courtyard first came to Wyrm's side as an attendant, she immediately challenged Erica to a duel in order to be the first wife. Although Wyrm, Erica, and the others denied the so-called first wife, whenever something happened, as long as Wyrm was not around, the girls would follow Erica's lead. This inevitably made Huina of the Clear Autumn Courtyard and Erica somewhat hostile. It was not until Alice came to Japan that Huina of the Clear Autumn Courtyard slowed down her attacks on Erica. Now that he thought about it, it seemed that Alice was the real first wife. What's going on? Wyrm raised an eyebrow. Forget it. After all, with Her Highness Alice, our relationship has improved quite a bit. Let Her Highness Alice help us with the title of first wife. Erica smiled slyly. If Alice were here, she would definitely accept it. Not only because of the relationship between Wyrm and Alice, but also because of Alice's bad taste. Wyrm believed that she would accept it. Forget it. I have something to tell you. Wyrm shook his head and stopped thinking about those messy things. His expression became serious. I've returned the Gorgon stone to Athena. She and I have a duel on the invisible island in the Pacific Ocean tonight. Uffed. Erica, who was drinking black tea, could not help but spit it out. What did you say? Erica looked at Wyrm rather helplessly. I knew that God's layers are troublesome existences. Erica sighed. Wyrm felt a little embarrassed. After all, he had secretly given the item that caused the starless night, which caused the end of the world, to the enemy. Although Wyrm and Athena were both friends and foes, it was true. Well, don't say that. Athena's existence is also a problem, so I'm prepared to defeat her in one go. After all, Athena was the goddess of wisdom. Her most terrifying thing was not her power, but her wisdom. I'm guessing that you won't kill Athena. Erica looked at Wyrm suspiciously. How's that? This made Erica feel a little awkward. After all, Wyrm and Athena made a bet that the loser would become the subordinate god of the winner, because he didn't want to kill Athena. If Silent Wonder won, not only would they be able to restrict Athena, but they would also be able to draw Athena's strength to their side. Why not? After all, you're especially gentle to women, my Lord Wang. But even so, Erica didn't object. After all, logically speaking, Wyrm wasn't the kind of person who would lay his hands on someone he had a good relationship with. Do you still need to tell the others? Erica asked. Forget about that. Thinking of Liliana's righteous teachings and Wanli Yoli's furious teachings, Wyrm felt that it was better not to tell them. I feel like you're a heartless man who cheats on his wife and has a mistress, Erica teased. Whatever you say. Wyrm had already given up. A moment later, Wyrm left. In the villa, Wyrm told Erica to say that he had not returned from the hidden world to cover it up. Using magic power to fly, Wyrm arrived at a certain part of the Pacific Ocean. The magic power here was especially abundant, and it was filled with a dark aura. As he flew down, a small island appeared before Wyrm's eyes. The sky, which had not yet darkened, was now completely dark due to some unknown factor. Wyrm landed on the island and looked around at this terrifying island. The island was filled with stone statues. They were the legendary heroes who had been petrified by Medusa's petrifying demon eye. Each stone statue was different in shape, but they had one thing in common, which was that the stone statues' faces were filled with fear. If a person with a weak state of mind were to come here, it was very likely that they would be affected by the aura emitted by these stone statues filled with terror. You really have a bad taste, Athena, Wyrm said to the surroundings. They only have themselves to blame. A beautiful female voice similar to Athena's sounded. Black fog appeared in front of Wyrm, and a beautiful girl walked out of it. The girl had waist-length hair, and wore a straw hoop on her head. She wore a Greek-style white off-the-shoulder dress. Her golden snake eyes were dazzling, and her beautiful face was unknowingly mesmerizing. In addition to that, a terrifying and powerful aura came from the girl. That aura was far more threatening than Susanu's. Even Wuming didn't have such a terrifying aura. Obviously, that was Athena, the goddess of the earth, who had restored her Trinity true form. Is this your original appearance? That lowly is more interesting. Wuming touched his chin and carefully looked at Athena. Oh, you really dare to say that, Vilo the Ransword. For the sake of being a snake, if you take the initiative to surrender, I can let you become my companion instead of a lowly subordinate god. As she spoke, Athena's aura was instantly released, and the monstrous aura of a queen gushed out. You're no longer the three-eyed lowly you used to be. Although you're quite interesting in your current queen form, I still prefer the three-eyed lowly you. Wuming didn't answer Athena's question. Instead, he commented on her. Athena's snake-like eyes glowed brightly. It seems that you refuse. Isn't it obvious? Furthermore, I am an existence that once sat on the throne. Surrendering without a fight is not in line with my character. As he spoke, Wuming bared his teeth and revealed an unruly smile. Originally, as a non-human, Wuming had some of the instincts of a beast. Now that Wuming had the physique of a godslayer, those instincts were even more obvious. Godslayers were a group of warlike existences, and they could become stronger as long as they fought. They would adapt to their abilities in battle, and in the end, their authority would become like the instincts of wild beasts, able to do as they pleased. Then, let's fulfill the agreement of that day. The loser will listen to the winner's arrangement. Athena took out a large dragon snake scythe from the black mist behind her. That's what I wanted. Wuming also took out a gun from the golden ripples. After that, Athena and Wuming moved at the same time. The black sickle, which represented death, and the white holy spear, which represented life, clashed for the first and last time. Chapter 222. In the Pacific Ocean, the terrifying island that had just appeared recently, death and life were fighting against each other. Whoosh! Athena, who was holding a scythe, swung it fiercely toward Wuming, and several black blades of death shot toward Wuming. Bang! 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 Silent, who was holding the spear of the world tree, Yggdrasil, used the tip of the spear, which was filled with life elements, to deflect the black blades. Then, Wuming held Yggdrasil in a reverse grip and placed it on his shoulder. Yggdrasil. With the incomplete release of the noble phantasm, the white holy spear turned into a green beam of light full of life and burst toward Athena. Athena waved her hand, and a few ferocious-looking giant rock snakes rose from the ground and blocked Athena's path. Hiss hiss hiss. Several giant snakes roared and rushed toward the green light beams. Bang! 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 After breaking through several giant snakes, the energy of the noble phantasm weakened, and it was bitten by a giant snake behind a large number of stones. After all, it was an incomplete noble phantasm. It was used by Wuming to test the waters. Even if it was broken, Wuming was not annoyed. Wuming waved his hand, and Yggdrasil, which was bitten by the giant snake, began to vibrate violently in the snake's mouth. Bang! The sound of glass breaking came from the giant snake's mouth, and its head exploded. Yggdrasil returned to Wuming's hand and was firmly grasped by Wuming. At this time, the sound of something breaking through the air came. Whoosh! Wuming hurriedly dodged a sharp arrow. Wuming looked at the source of the arrow. Athena was holding a quaint oak bow in her hand, aiming at Wuming. As he pulled the string, 2 arrows appeared on the oak bow. Whoosh! 2 more arrows flew toward Wuming. Wuming raised his hand, and Yggdrasil bounced the 2 arrows away. Immediately afterward, Wuming jumped up in an instant, and a huge snake appeared in Wuming's position. Then the giant snake, which was a few times larger than the others, rushed toward Wuming. Noble and powerful, wise and kind, I will become a miracle and lead the world to the dawn. Wuming's stone plate lit up, and the long pointer pointed at 12 o'clock, and the invisible magic flame attached to Wuming's body. Heaven fire! The holy white flame turned in a spiral shape, and shot toward the giant rock snake. Whoosh! Like gasoline being ignited by flames, the giant rock snake was instantly infected by the white flames and burned. Hiss! Then, the giant rock snake screamed as it was burned to ashes by the flames. At this time, Wuming turned around. Clang! Wuming's white holy lance Yggdrasil collided with the black dragon snake's scythe, and sparks splashed. It was Athena, who wanted to sneak attack Wuming but was discovered. As expected of the goddess of wisdom and war. She's really something. Wuming smiled happily. It's just a small trick in front of you. Sure enough, I like you more and more. Right now, her intention was to have Wuming submit to Athena, full of the aura of a queen. I don't have the habit of being under others. You'd better be obedient and be my subordinate god. Wu Ming and Athena suddenly exerted their strength and collided with each other. Wu Ming stretched out his hand, and countless golden ripples appeared, and golden chains burst out from it. The target was Athena. Athena hurriedly retreated, and Enkidu hurriedly wrapped around Athena. Athena, who was in the air, constantly dodged and avoided the golden chains. While Athena was still dodging the chains, Wuming returned Enkidu to Enkidu. Wuming raised his spear and attacked. Countless green energy emerged from Yggdrasil and formed green vines. Together with Wuming's hand, the vines wrapped around Yggdrasil, and a huge green vine spear wrapped around Wuming's hand appeared. Athena was indeed the goddess of wisdom. She was very relaxed when dodging Enkidu's attack. Athena looked at Wuming and stared at Wuming. Then, Athena's golden snake eyes turned gray and emitted a terrifying magic power. Wuming could clearly feel that his speed had slowed down, and his legs were gradually losing feeling. Then Athena looked at him again. Glancing at his petrified feet, Wuming instantly released his magic power, and the petrified parts on Wuming's body began to fall off. The grayish-black snake eyes scanned Enkidu. Enkidu, who was in charge of Enkidu, instantly sensed the abnormality of Enkidu. Lord Wuming, the opponent is using the demon eye of petrification, Enkidu said to Wuming. Wuming understood, and Enkidu entered the golden ripples and was put away by Wuming. Then Wuming chanted a new language. Lightning, lightning, lightning. I am the conqueror who can defeat 1,000 with white, 10,000 with 1,000, and 10,000 with 10,000. Now for me who is on the side of justice, please shine brightly and bestow me with divine power. I am the one who will crush all enemies and enmity between humans and demons. Fear the one with wings. Evil people and powerful people are all afraid of me with wings. My wings will bring you curses. Evil people will not be able to hit me. The long and short needles pointed at the 9 o'clock and 10 o'clock respectively, and the thunder god and phoenix avatars activated one after another. Wuming, who had turned into an invisible lightning bolt, was not affected by Athena's demon eye of petrification. Wuming was so fast that Athena did not even have time to react, and he instantly appeared beside her. Wuming turned into a human and stabbed at Athena. As if hit by a meteorite, Athena fell heavily to the ground, stirring up a large amount of dust. As the dust settled, Wuming, who was holding a huge vine spear, looked at the large crater that was gradually healing after being destroyed. Your island is quite sturdy. It can even heal itself, Wuming said in surprise. It's useless. As long as this invisible island is not completely destroyed, it can automatically heal itself. Just like me, the mother goddess of the underworld and death, I have an incomparably strong regenerative ability and vitality. Even if I am injured, I can quickly recover. Athena looked at Wuming with a teasing smile. Is that so? Wuming's lips curled up as he continued. Then, I will destroy you along with this island. He cancelled the thunder god and phoenix avatars, and the long and short needles pointed at the 11 o'clock direction. For victory, come to me quickly. Undying sun, please bestow upon me a shining steed. Horses with enough intelligence, bring me the light wheel that symbolizes your master. Nay. Chapter 223. Accompanied by a loud neigh, the sky that was originally dark and without a trace of light suddenly cleared up. A beautiful white horse, accompanied by a huge sun, descended from the sky. Nay, my old enemy, the white horse of the sun. Athena frowned as she looked at the fireball that was comparable to a real sun with a sour expression. Wuming held Yggdrasil with one arm raised high and the other arm holding the giant Yggdrasil, then looked at Athena. So can you withstand my double incarnation of the sun, Athena? As he spoke, Wu Ming's raised hand abruptly fell down. Nay. The white steed charged down without any fancy decorations. Athena looked at Wu Ming, who was standing motionless in the distance. She gave up on attacking and condensed her mana into a shield. The Aegis shield, huh? Wu Ming read out the name of the shield. Legend has it that the Aegis shield was made by Hephaestus, the god of fire in Greek mythology. One was held by Zeus, and the other was held by Athena. The one held by Zeus was called Aegis. The Aegis shield had the ability to generate storms. When it was placed in the sky would become dark. And when it was picked up, the sky would become clear again. It was said that this shield had a super high level of defense that even Zeus' powerful weapon couldn't damage. The Aegis shield held by Athena was called Aegis because the shield was inlaid with Medusa's head. Legend has it that Perseus, with the help of Athena and Hermes, killed Medusa. After that, Perseus cut off Medusa's head. Although Medusa was dead, the power of petrification in her eye of petrification did not disappear. After knowing that, Perseus offered Medusa's head to Athena, and then Athena inlaid Medusa's head on her shield. That was the origin of Aegis' shield. Athena's shield was different from Zeus' shield. Athena's shield only had the defense of Zeus' shield, but it did not have the ability to summon storms. However, because it was embedded with the Medusa's head, when the Medusa's head opened its eyes, it became a magic shield that would petrify anyone it faced. Meanwhile, all the weapons and items that the god of disobedience used were god relics that the god of disobedience had imitated. To put it simply, they were not real weapons, armor, and items that were mentioned in myths. Instead, they were made of magic, which was very similar to a servant. Even so, it was still a clone of the god of disobedience's artifact, so it shouldn't be underestimated. After all, it still had some of the original artifact's abilities. Just a little sun fall. Athena held the Aegis shield in both hands and welcomed the arrival of the incarnation of the sun. The eye of Medusa on the Aegis shield opened, and the gray light shone on the white horse. However, the white horse was still descending at its original speed. The incarnation of the sun was a new authority after the fusion of Waleslana's white horse and Mekir's god king's divinity. Not only was it more powerful than the previous white horse, but it was also strengthened by authority and double incarnation. This authority could be said to be one of Wu Ming's trump cards. In order to deal with the immortal mother goddess, Wu Ming directly activated this incarnation. After all, it was Wu Ming's first time using this incarnation, so he might not be able to control it well. The main reason was that basically no one could force Wu Ming to use this trump card, so Wu Ming had never used it before. Now, in order to defeat Athena, Wu Ming chose to activate this incarnation. Fortunately, Athena chose to fight in the Pacific Ocean, so there was no need to worry about the ordinary people around her being affected. This was also one of the reasons why Wu Ming came without much preparation. Rumble. The white horse crashed into Athena, who was holding the Aegis shield, and the violent explosion directly covered the entire invisible island. At this moment, the entire invisible island was completely destroyed. Wu Ming floated in the sky, looking at the real sea of fire below. After all, the flames brought by the incarnation of the sun were inextinguishable, and would only be extinguished when Wu Ming's incarnation was extinguished. The sea was violently fluctuating because of the sun summoned by Wu Ming, and a large amount of white fog was constantly rising. After that, Wu Ming carefully searched. At this moment, Wu Ming suddenly discovered a petite loli floating quietly above the sea of fire. The surrounding flames were scorching her, causing her to frown the entire time. In the competition between the sun and Mother Earth, Wu Ming's son won. In fact, Wu Ming didn't have any suspense about it. He couldn't imagine how powerful Wu Ming's incarnation could be. Perhaps the adult Wu Ming could handle it. After all, the growth of the root dragon's strength was not by leaps and bounds, but by a qualitative change. Of course, he would have to wait until he reached adulthood. Wu Ming shook his head, flew down, and hugged the unconscious and naked Athena who was still floating on the sea. After that, he fished out the Gorgon stone that was about to sink to the bottom of the sea. After all, the Gorgon stone that had been unsealed could not be simply left around. It was a high-level god relic that represented the divinity of the mother goddess, and it might even attract disobedient gods. Looking at the naked Athena, Wuming looked away awkwardly. Wuming took out a piece of white cloth from the golden ripples of Dragonist and put it on Athena. Because Athena had the Aegis shield, and Wuming deliberately reduced the lethality of the sun after breaking Athena's shield, Athena didn't die directly. However, even if she died, Athena still had the authority to resurrect. In fact, if Athena didn't take Wuming's son head-on, she wouldn't have failed here. After all, they were enemies, so naturally she couldn't give in. In addition, Wuming did not continue to attack, so Athena chose to take it head-on. The goddess of wisdom should have chosen not to fight in the face of the situation just now, but in the end, she still lost to her own willfulness. Looking at the young Athena in his arms, Wuming smiled helplessly and shook his head. Because the sun's incarnation directly melted the invisible island, and they were at sea, Wuming didn't need to do any post-battle maintenance. With a simple wave of his hand, Wuming dispelled the undying flame and flew away with Athena, who was only draped in a white cloth. The sea level was still in a state of high temperature, constantly fluctuating. Chapter 224. Wuming returned to the outside of the villa. As soon as he landed, Wuming noticed several cold gazes. When he turned around, Erica, Liliana, Qingqiu Courtyard Huina, Wanli Guyoli, and Alice were all looking at Wuming. However, Erica and Alice's gazes were filled with joy. Qingqiu Courtyard Huina's gaze was somewhat worried, and Wanli Guyoli and Liliana's gazes were filled with anger. I heard that Lord Wuming returned the Gorgon stone to Lady Athena. Wanli Guyoli's face was gloomy. He also very kindly helped Lady Athena recover her strength. Liliana frowned. And Lord Wuming and Lady Athena made a bet. Wanli Guyoli continued with a gloomy face. And it's a bet where the loser will be the winner's subordinate god. Liliana was still frowning. Lord Wuming, do you know that this is an extremely dangerous bet? Looking up, Wanli Guyoli looked at Wuming. It's fine if it's Erica, but you didn't even bring me your knight. Liliana looked at Wuming with dissatisfaction. Wanli Guyoli and Liliana stared at Wuming. However, as if he was already used to it, Wuming walked straight to the villa. Then Wuming said, "Let's go in first. It's cold outside." Everyone sat on the sofa. Then, Wuming arranged for Athena to stay in an empty room and walked out. Sitting on the sofa, Wuming looked at the girls. "By the way, how did you know?" Wuming glanced at Erica, wondering if she was the one who revealed the news. Erica smiled slyly. It just spread around the world that the Eastern Hemisphere entered a polar day in a few minutes, Wanli Guyoli said. We quickly gathered because we were worried that something might happen, but Erica claimed that it was your doing. Huina of the Blue Autumn Yard said. Come to think of it, Welslana has the power to summon the sun. Plus, you have disappeared. No matter how you look at it, it has something to do with you. Alice smiled. I can't hide it anymore. After all, it's already so obvious. Erica pretended to wave her hand helplessly. Only then did Wuming realize that he had indeed gone a little overboard just now. Wuming was probably affected by the Godslayer's constitution. He would sometimes forget some things when he was fighting. At that time, Wuming only wanted to get rid of Athena in one breath, so he released the incarnation of the sun. Now the official history committee is busy trying to eliminate the panic of the people. And as a knight, I can't even serve my master when he's fighting. What a failure, Liliana said with some regret. Don't force yourself, Lily. The battle between Wuming and Athena, who has recovered the true form of Mother Earth, isn't something we can participate in. For example, if we were present when Wuming summoned the sun just now, we would definitely drag Wuming down. Also, you have to have confidence in your master, Lily. Alice said leisurely. This was also why Erica neither objected to Wuming going to the invisible island alone, nor did she blame Wuming for challenging Athena without permission. Liliana nodded slightly. Of course, Liliana was aware of this. However, her pride as a knight wouldn't allow her to watch her master go to the battlefield alone. Let's not talk about this for now. That was Lady Athena just now, right? Is it really okay for Lord Wuming to bring Lady Athena back? That's Lady Athena of Mother Earth. Wanli Guyoli looked at Wuming with some disappointment and scolded him fiercely. Don't worry, Yoli. The gods naturally abide by the rules. Since Athena was defeated by me, she definitely won't mess around, Wuming explained. Wuming thought of something, and then said with a smile, "And your attitude now is very impolite." Wanli Guyoli was shocked and quickly apologized. "Please punish only me, your majesty. Don't implicate others." Looking at Wanli Guyoli, who instantly sat down, Wuming laughed. "Ha ha ha ha, huh?" Wanli Guyoli looked at Wuming in confusion. Erica couldn't stand it anymore, and helped Wanli Guyoli up. "Get up, Yoli. Wuming is joking with you. Really, after being together for so long, you still don't understand his character." "Well, Lord Wuming sometimes has a bad taste." Alice nodded and agreed. "Don't you think about yourself first when talking about others' bad taste, Alice?" Wuming stopped laughing and looked at Alice with a, "You still have the nerve to talk about others' look." "Thank you for the compliment, Lord Wuming." Alice looked into Wuming's eyes and nodded with a smile. "Well, everyone go to sleep. Although a lot of things have happened just now, it's over." Wuming clapped his hands and said. All the girls nodded, and then returned to their rooms. It was just a pity that the official history committee was still cleaning up the mess caused by Wuming. After all, it was caused by their new king. Even if they didn't sleep, they had to deal with it. Then, Wuming came to Athena's room. "You should be awake, Athena." Wuming sat on Athena's bed and looked at the sleeping lowly in front of him. The petite Athena's eyes flew open and she sat up. "I was afraid that I would disturb you flirting with your girls, so I continued to pretend to be asleep." Hearing this voice and looking at the unconscious Athena, Wuming smiled and touched Athena's head. "Then I must thank you, my subordinate god." "Hey." Athena was quite unhappy, but because of the bet, she didn't resist Wuming's touch. "Have you really decided to release the last king?" Athena's snake eyes stared straight at Wuming. Wuming nodded solemnly. "Now you should know that I'm a god from another world." Athena nodded. "I have my own purpose in coming to this world." "Sir, your purpose has basically been achieved." Wuming's noble phantasm, the 12 incarnations, could be said to be extremely powerful. With the dependent incarnation, Wuming's second authority, Ling Zhuzi, was basically useless. Ling Zhuzi, throw out the spirit orb obtained from killing Neza, the god of steel. The spirit orb will transform into Neza and provide combat power for the tamed demon. Since I am indebted here and promised Alice to solve the problem of the last king, I will definitely solve it. "Even if you die?" Athena asked. "Even if I die, I will not die," Wuming answered firmly. "You really are a man with a divine artifact." Athena then lay down. "I'm a little tired. As my main god, shouldn't you hug me to sleep?" Athena looked straight at Wuming. "Really, so many requests. If I didn't know better, I would have thought that I was your subordinate god." However, Wuming lay down obediently and hugged Athena. Athena leaned into Wuming's arms and rubbed against him. "Just be a pillow." With this thought, Wuming and Athena fell asleep together. Chapter 225. At night, somewhere in Japan, Guinevere sat in the arms of Lancelot, who was riding a white horse. He held the arrowhead disc and closed his eyes. Faint magic particles floated around Guinevere. It could be seen that Guinevere was performing a magic trick. As if he had found something, Guinevere opened his eyes. However, the magical thing was that there was a universe in Guinevere's eyes. It was a planet in the universe, Earth. In Earth's orbit right above Japan, a platform full of magic floated and rotated with Earth. "Found it." Guinevere's voice was a little excited. "It seems that even if you are demoted to a god ancestor, your astral vision is still powerful," Lancelot commented. Guinevere shook his head excitedly. "If it weren't for the fight between Lord Wuming and Lord Athena, the strongest steel wouldn't have awakened, and I wouldn't have been able to find the last king." After all, this was also one of Wuming's ideas. In Japan, the reason why Susanoo and a group of people from the hidden world lured the great sage, Heaven's equal here, was to eliminate the dragon and destroy the snake. This was to prevent the dragon and snake attributes from attracting the last king and breaking the seal of the last king. If it were 200 or 300 years ago, they wouldn't have to be so careful. However, they couldn't do it now. As long as there was another demon king, Godslayer, on the ground, the seal of the last king would weaken. Now that there were 7 Godslayers, the seal of the last king could be said to be very loose. If it weren't for the fact that Wyrm became a Godslayer as the god of disobedience, the last king would have awakened long ago. As Wyrm said before, if there was another Godslayer now, the last king would definitely awaken. What Wyrm, Guinevere, and Lancelot had discussed in the grove was Wyrm's plan. They wanted to use the dragon and snake attributes to stimulate the last king's awakening and make him appear directly. However, the result was a failure. Wyrm had long thought of this element of the dragon-snake attribute stimulation, so he had sent Zacia to America. However, plans could not keep up with changes. The battle between Wyrm and Athena could also be considered as the stimulation of the dragon-snake attribute. After all, Athena was Mother Earth, and Wyrm had the dual nature of steel and serpent. Especially during the battle with Athena, Wyrm fully released the dragon-serpent attribute that he sealed after killing Neza. Wyrm didn't think that 2 dragon serpents' aura and 1 Godslayer's aura couldn't awaken the last king. But in the end, the king did not appear. This was also the reason why Wyrm used his trump card, the sun, right after the battle with Athena. He wanted to preserve his strength to deal with the last king, but the last king did not show up. As a last resort, Wyrm contacted Guinevere and asked him to use spirit vision to find the place where the last king was sealed. Liliana, Wanli Guyuri and Alice, whose ancestors were god ancestors, all had extremely powerful spirit vision. Wyrm didn't believe that Guinevere, a god ancestor who had fallen from Mother Earth, wouldn't have spirit vision. As a result, as Wyrm expected, Guinevere really found the location of the last king. Although it's inappropriate to say this now, I still want to ask, have you really decided, my beloved daughter? Lancelot said in a puzzled tone. Guinevere fell into silence. Guinevere understood what Lancelot meant. Lancelot was asking if he was prepared for the master he served and his lover to kill each other. Whether it was the relationship between the hero and the demon king, the relationship between the strongest steel and the legendary dragon, or the relationship between different beliefs, Wyrm and the last king were destined to not coexist peacefully. They must kill each other. This was something that Guinevere knew. Guinevere's eyes were full of confusion. Lancelot fell silent as well. There's an old Chinese saying that I think will suit you if I change it a little. Since ancient times, it's hard to have both loyalty and love. Perhaps it can be used on you now. Loyalty freed the last king and let him fight with the one he loved. There was a high possibility that the one he loved would be killed. Love gave up on freeing the last king and let the one he loved live in the world. After a long silence, Guinevere spoke. Then if I choose love, uncle, will you kill me? Guinevere asked a question that sounded like a big joke. Lancelot was the shadow of God who protected Guinevere, the god ancestor. Guinevere actually asked his own guardian if he would kill him. Was this not a big joke? However, Lancelot's answer was, I will kill thee, Lancelot said calmly. I will kill thee who is not loyal to my master. Even if you are my beloved daughter, I will still kill thee. However, Guinevere accepted it calmly as if he already knew the answer. Then, uncle, can you make a bet with Guinevere? Guinevere asked. Lancelot fell silent for a moment, then nodded his head that was wrapped in armor. Guinevere, who felt Lancelot's nod, smiled and continued. If the last king is defeated by the Villo, then you and I will pledge allegiance to the Villo and become the Villo's wife and knight. What do you think? To be honest, Lancelot was shaken. Having once followed Vero in this world, she knew that she once had the thought of, how great would it be if this person was my lord? But her loyalty to him did not waver. However, 1,000 years of longing could destroy a person, but it could also shake the heart of a disobedient god. I can't make the decision. I must ask my master. Lancelot's answer was neither yes nor no. However, Guinevere smiled. Of course, we have to ask that lord first. Then Guinevere began to unseal the last king. Guinevere left Lancelot's embrace, dismounted from his horse, and came to the ground. Then he took out a golden cup from nowhere. This was the holy grail of King Arthur that the Black Prince, one of the Godslayers, and many other magicians were after. Guinevere placed the Holy Grail in front of him and knelt down with the arrowhead disc in his hand. Lancelot came to the side to protect Guinevere as well as to be on guard. Guinevere, the Holy Grail, and the arrowhead disc began to glow. The ritual to summon the last king had begun. Suddenly, a bolt of lightning shot towards Guinevere at a speed that shocked Lancelot. "Uncle!" Guinevere was shocked and shouted Lancelot's name. Just as the lightning was about to reach Guinevere, a spear stabbed at it. Chapter 226. The tip of the spear pierced the lightning. If it did not stop moving forward, the lightning would definitely be pierced by the tip of the spear. In an instant, the lightning made a sharp turn and deviated from Guinevere. Guinevere, who was somewhat worried, was relieved. Then the lightning stopped not far from Guinevere and turned into a human figure. The figure was wearing a luxurious suit, a bow tie, and leather shoes. His black hair was parted in half, and it set off his handsome face. "Lord Yarek, you are really haunting me." Although Guinevere used honorifics, there was a trace of anger in his tone. That's right, the nobleman standing in front of Guinevere and Lancelot was the British godslayer, Alexander Gerstein. His nickname was Black Prince Yarek, who was even more famous than himself. "It's a pity. This is the best chance I've had in the past. I'm afraid I won't have another chance in the future." Yarek, who did not get what he wanted, was not upset. Instead, he calmly analyzed the situation. "It's really hard on you, Lancelot. You have to protect such a useless guy," Yarek mocked. However, Lancelot did not accept Yarek's mockery. He was already holding a spear, fully armed, and staring at Yarek. The atmosphere began to become tense. As old rivals who had been fighting for some time, Guinevere and Lancelot naturally knew what each other wanted. That was the Holy Grail placed in front of Guinevere, which had magic power comparable to that of multiple godslayers. However, Guinevere would not hand over the Holy Grail no matter what. This was because the Holy Grail was an essential and important prop for the last king. The reason why Guinevere created the Holy Grail to store magic power was to replenish the magic power of the last king, who had exhausted his magic power because of his deep sleep. Just from this point alone, one could see the power of the last king. The amount of magic power required was comparable to the magic power of multiple godslayers combined. Except for Wyrm, among the 6 godslayers, whether it was the oldest, Wyrm, or the youngest, Salvatore, they had never worried about the lack of magic power. No matter what kind of battle it was, no matter how exhausting it was, none of the 6 godslayers except Wyrm had ever said that they did not have enough mana. Based on this point alone, the last king's mana was comparable to the mana of multiple godslayers combined. This showed how powerful the last king was. The reason why Wyrm was excluded was because, like the last king, Wyrm had more magic power than the last king. After all, it was a root dragon. How could it lack mana? Of course, it could not be said that Wyrm's magic power was infinite. It was just that under the condition of a rather large base, the addition of the condition that his magic power recovery speed was not slow, which led to the continuous release of magic power. It would take months or years for Wyrm to recover his magic power, and that was under the premise that Wyrm did not automatically recover his magic power. Coupled with Wyrm's constant meditation over the years, the upper limit of his demonic power had also broken through. This was also why Wyrm dared to compete with the last king. Now this country is the territory of that lord. Aren't you afraid of offending that lord? Guinevere warned Yarek. You are talking about Villo the Ransword, the guy who calls himself Wyrm. He became a godslayer as a disobedient. Even if he is not as warlike and brutal as other people of his race, I can't agree with him. After all, he is a disobedient god with the authority of other disobedient gods. Yarek calmly stated his evaluation of Wyrm. Guinevere frowned. After all, Yarek was the person he admired, so he naturally could not bear to hear others talk about him. Lancelot was also a little upset. He clenched his spear with one hand and pointed it at Yarek. If you still want to talk nonsense here, you'd better leave. I'm afraid I won't be able to control myself and kill you as the god of disobedience. After all, Lancelot was Guinevere's shadow of God. He could not leave Guinevere's vicinity. The only way was to appear as the god of disobedience. This would not only increase Lancelot's power, but also free him from the restriction of protecting Guinevere. This was why Lancelot said that if Guinevere chose to betray him, he would kill her. Looking at the furious Lancelot, Yarek smiled. Although that person is also King Arthur, you and the god ancestor behind you are not Guinevere and Lancelot. Why are you so agitated? Yarek mocked. A brilliant sword light shot toward Yarek. Yarek immediately dodged. Lancelot maintained his spear posture and looked at Yarek. I'll ask you again. Are you leaving or not? What if I insist on staying? Then I'll have to appear as the god of disobedience and kill you. Lancelot and Yarek stared at each other while Guinevere resumed the ritual of summoning the last king. We pray for the rebirth of the sword. Cut through the darkness of the apocalypse and kill the demon king of the apocalypse. The arrowhead disc in Guinevere's arms and the holy grail in front of him began to glow. The noble sword of swords, the blade of blades, the steel of steel. The arrowhead disc and the holy grail began to float into the sky at a speed that made Yarek frown. They turned into a meteor and flew into the universe. Thou art the blade that annihilates the demon king. Thou art the holy light that saves the world. Slay all Rakshasas. Be the call of our allies. Return to the world. After the chanting, the arrowhead disc and the holy grail arrived on a platform in the universe. There was a sword in the center of the platform. If Wyrm was here, he would definitely recognize it. It was a knight's greatsword that was almost identical to Artoria's, King Arthur's, Excalibur in the lake, or even exactly the same. However, this holy sword looked extremely rusty, as if it could break at any moment. This was the sword of the legendary hero, the sword of salvation that killed the demon king. The arrowhead disc and the holy grail floated above the sword of salvation. In an instant, the arrowhead disc and the holy grail melted and turned into liquid that flowed into the sword of salvation. Beep beep beep. The sword of salvation began to emit white lightning. Beep 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 beep. The lightning became more and more intense until it spread to the entire platform. Then the platform exploded. Boom. Without the restriction of the platform, the sword of salvation began to fly downward. In the blink of an eye, the sword of salvation reached Earth and Guinevere's side. Boom. The landing of the sword of salvation stirred up a lot of dust. Guinevere, Lancelot, and Yarek looked at the dust with serious expressions. Gradually, the dust dissipated. A slightly tired young man walked out with the divine blade of salvation in his hand. Chapter 227. Rather than calling him a young man, it would be better to call him a severely exhausted youth. In the end, I still came to the surface. The last king spoke with a weary tone. Master. My lord. Guinevere knelt on one knee, and Lancelot also dismounted and knelt on the ground, lowering his head. Both of them were quite excited. Finally, the long-cherished wish they had been pursuing for thousands of years finally came true. The last king glanced at Guinevere and Lancelot. It turned out to be you. However, there was a hint of weariness in his eyes, but he instantly recovered his tiredness. Then the last king said to himself, Since I have come to the ground, I have to kill the godslayers as soon as possible. Otherwise the end will come. Then, the last king looked at the Black Prince Yarek with his tired eyes. In an instant his tired eyes became extremely sharp. The last king raised the sword of salvation and slashed it gently, and a huge and fast lightning slashed toward Yarek. Not good. Yarek was shocked and hurriedly activated his lightning spark. That was the authority Yarek often used, and it could be said to be his representative authority. This authority came from the fallen angel Ramir, who controlled lightning and illusions. It allowed Yarek to enter the world of speed that no one could reach. It was a high-speed movement technique entwined with lightning, which allowed Yarek to obtain the agility of a cat. Whoosh! The lightning released by the last king struck Yarek, who had transformed into lightning. Yarek used the lightning to flee into the distance. However, for some reason, the last king didn't chase after Yarek. Let's go. After saying that, the last king stepped away, walked past Guinevere and Lancelot, and left. Guinevere and Lancelot waited for the last king to pass before standing up and following him. Not long after the three of them left, the ground nearby began to change. The surrounding flowers and trees began to wither rapidly, and the ground began to dry up as if it lost its life. In the distance, lightning fell on the ground and turned into a figure. Cough, cough. Yarek half knelt on the ground with one hand covering his chest, and the other covering the corner of his mouth. Blood flowed from his hand. The last king, huh? What a terrifying fellow. That's right, the last king had injured Yarek, who had entered the seraphic speed state, with just a casual strike. Although Yarek, who had entered seraphic speed, would lose his physical defense as a godslayer, the last king was able to injure Yarek with a casual blow. This was enough to show how extraordinary the last king was. Also, that blow just grazed me. It's unbelievable. If it had hit me directly, I might have been dead, Yarek analyzed calmly. Then, it turned into a bolt of lightning and left. Wuming's villa. Wuming and Athena, who were sleeping soundly, immediately woke up. Do you feel it? The aura of steel. Athena sat up and looked at Wuming. It seems that the last king has descended. No, it should be that Guinevere has successfully awakened him, Wuming said with certainty. Is this your plan as well? Athena asked. Of course not. This is Guinevere's backup plan. Wuming got off the bed and walked to the window. He looked at the unnatural situation outside and continued. The last king will unlock his seal when the number of demon kings on the ground increases. Until now, the seal of the last king has begun to move. But because I am not a pure godslayer, the last king has not completely awakened yet. Athena followed and looked outside with Wuming. Originally, I wanted to use the draconic snake attribute to stimulate the last king to appear, so I sent my subordinates to capture the draconic snakes. But because there were already draconic snakes, so you fought with me, right? Athena's snake eyes looked at Wuming. As expected of the goddess of wisdom. You understand immediately. Wuming smiled awkwardly. After all, Wuming was using Athena. I don't blame you. I admire the fact that you can use wisdom to achieve your goal. Athena smiled slyly after seeing Wuming's embarrassment. Wuming heaved a sigh of relief. So Athena was just teasing him. Shaking his head, Wuming left the window and walked to the door. Now that the last king has appeared, the chaos outside must be caused by the last king. After all, I am the mastermind, so I have to take the responsibility of defeating him. Wuming was right. The last king was also a god of disobedience. As a god of disobedience, he must have the ability to cause catastrophic changes to his surroundings. As mentioned before, if the god of war descended, the war would occur unnaturally. If the god of sea descended, the sea level would rise unnaturally. If the god of sun descended, the sun would become extraordinarily hot. As for what the last king would cause, Wuming didn't know. But Wuming believed that the disaster caused by the last king would not be weaker than the other gods of disobedience. Wuming believed that the disaster caused by the last king would be 100 times stronger than the other gods of disobedience. Stay here and rest. I have placed the Gorgon stone on the table. Remember not to run around. Gotcha. As the door closed, Athena was the only one left in the room. Athena silently walked to the table where the Gorgon stone was placed. Then the corners of her mouth curled up. Wuming walked out of the room and came to the hall. He saw the fully armed girls, including Alice, who was mentally exhausted from using spirit vision. After Wuming arrived, all the girls' eyes were focused on Wuming. Did everyone realize? Wuming asked. The girls nodded in agreement. It's the last king, right? Alice said. Wuming nodded. Most likely. Then Alice spoke. Just now the Sage Council of Greenwich sent me a message. Just now, almost all the magic associations in the world sent a message to the Sage Council of Greenwich. The spirit veins under their jurisdiction have been disrupted to varying degrees. Mr. Gonzai just called me and said that the spirit veins in Japan have been completely disrupted. So he needs to ask Yuri and Huina for help, Erica said. Master Wuming, I have to hurry back to the United Kingdom. I need to go back and hold a ceremony to stabilize the spirit veins, Alice said. Then I'll ask Erica to send you off, Wuming said. No need, Master Wuming. I'm afraid Erica and Miss Liliana have to rush back to Italy too, Alice said with a smile. Wuming looked at Erica and Liliana. Because the two of us are rare prodigies in the Italian Magic Association, my uncle asked me to go back to Italy to stabilize the spirit veins. Grandpa told me the same. He also said that the king would definitely allow it. Liliana blushed. After all, as a knight, she could only stay in the rear and let her master go to the battlefield alone in the face of a great enemy. Liliana couldn't help but feel a little guilty. It's okay. You can go back too. However, I'll give you some protection first. Alice blushed when she heard Wuming's words. It's a normal protection. Wuming glanced at Alice and said with a smile. Then, Wuming touched the girls' foreheads to give them the protection of super magic power. In this way you can squander it however you want, Wuming said. Then the girls left the villa. Then a guest came to the villa. Chapter 228. In the hall, Wuming sat casually on the sofa and quietly waited for the guest in front of him to speak. The guest seemed to want Wuming to speak first, so he didn't speak. Wuming yawned casually and continued to be silent. As if admitting defeat, the guest spoke. The disobedient king. You know about the arrival of the last king, right? Yarek couldn't bear the silence and spoke first. Since the other party had spoken, Wuming didn't hide it. I know, or rather, I planned the arrival of the last king. In an instant, Yarek's look at Wuming changed. From a guy he could barely work with to a complete enemy. Wuming saw the look in Yarek's eyes, or rather, from the beginning, Wuming saw that Yarek was rejecting him, so Wuming mocked Yarek. In any case, the final king will definitely descend. I merely brought forward the time of his descent. Listening to Wuming's nonchalant speech, Yarek frowned. Do you know how severe the disaster caused by the last king is? You dare to summon the last king to the ground ahead of time. Although Yarek wasn't a good person, he couldn't watch the world suffer, and this was also due to Yarek's good upbringing. Of course I know, and the reason I let him descend is to defeat the last king, to defeat him completely. Wuming meant that he wanted to completely eliminate the last king to prevent him from coming again in the future. After all, Yarek had read in the records that the last king came more than once, and every time he came, he would disappear after killing all the demon kings, and the disaster on the earth would stop. Wuming's idea was correct, but, do you really have the ability to completely eliminate the last king, Villotharanst? Yarek called out Wuming's disobedient name. Don't think that you can kill the last king just because you're a god. Wuming scoffed at Yarek's mockery. You came to find me after meeting the last king, right? Wuming asked. Wuming had received news from Guinevere that the Black Prince Yarek had witnessed the resurrection of the last king, and had escaped after being injured by the last king. Yarek was defeated by the last king, so he came back to Wuming. This was Wuming's guess. So what? Yarek frowned. Then let me give you a word of advice. Don't judge others based on your own standards. What he meant was, you are weak but don't think of others as weak. I carried out this series of plans in order to defeat the last king. Since the other side was so confident, Yarek didn't say anything else. Then, resisting the urge to leave, Yarek spoke again. Since that's the case, you must know about the Ancient Covenant. The Ancient Covenant was the special authority that only a small number of steel had, as Sun Wukong, the great sage equal to heaven, had said. Wuming nodded. The last king must have the authority of the Ancient Covenant. I thought of a way to weaken his power. When Yarek said this, Wuming also thought of something. That was, since the Ancient Covenant is the power to multiply the number of Godslayers, then, if there is only one Godslayer left, then the Ancient Covenant will be useless. Engage in civil war to reduce the number of Godslayers. This was the idea that Yarek and Wuming came up with. Since you are so confident in yourself, do you want to try this method? Yarek looked at Wuming cautiously. In response, Wuming smiled. I have to say, this method is indeed very effective. However, I don't think the last king's strength lies in the Ancient Covenant. The last king had the Ancient Covenant to increase his power, but Wuming didn't believe that Sun Wukong, who wasn't the last king, would have the Ancient Covenant. The last king was called the last king because he had the power to resist the last king. So, I reject your suggestion. Wuming looked into Yarek's eyes and said firmly, you can try to communicate with the other godslayers and engage in civil war among the demon kings. I accept that you can attack me at any time, but Wuming sat up straight and looked at Yarek. Do it as soon as possible. Otherwise, the last king will be defeated by me. Then Wuming leaned on the sofa and closed his eyes. Yarek narrowed his eyes, thinking about something. Then he turned into a lightning bolt and left Wuming's mansion. Wuming, who was sitting on the sofa with his eyes closed, said without turning his head, Sebastian. Yes. The old man named Sebastian appeared behind Wuming. Did Satya successfully escape from John's pursuit? Wuming asked. Yes, Wuming-sama. With my help, Satya has escaped from the pursuit of the American godslayer John Pluto Smith, and came to Japan. At this moment, Satya is guarding Angela in the cave behind the mansion. After listening to Sebastian's words, Wuming felt a little helpless. In fact, Wuming asked Satya to capture Angela a long time ago. After all, the only snake that had nothing to do with him was the American god, Angela. Wuming's original intention was to use Angela as a primer to stimulate the appearance of the last king, but he didn't expect that America's godslayer, John Pluto Smith, would be so difficult to deal with that Zaisha couldn't safely bring Angela to Japan. In the end, Wuming chose to use himself and Athena as a catalyst. Although the effect wasn't good, the final result was good, and the last king was revived. Now Angela was useless, and Wuming wasn't someone who would kill easily, but he couldn't just let Angela go. After all, that guy had done a lot of bad things. Keep him as a pet. Incidentally, Angela's true form was a 50-meter-long demonic snake, Leviathan the snake god. Let Satya bring Angela here. We don't need to watch her for the time being. Yes, I'll contact Satya. Sebastian stepped aside and began to contact Satya. After about a few seconds, a black and red portal appeared in front of Wuming. Zaisha walked out gracefully with a submissive little loli following behind her. If he was not mistaken, this should be Angela. Long time no see, Lord Wuming. I've missed you. Satya was infatuated with him as soon as she arrived. However, Wuming didn't pay attention to Satya, but to the lowly Angela behind her. The reason why Wuming paid attention to Angela was because she was naked. That's right, there were only a few bandages wrapped around her petite body, which was even more seductive than being completely naked. Ahem, why don't you find her some clothes, Satya? Wuming turned his head slightly and asked. This has nothing to do with me, Lord Wuming. She was the one who insisted on not wearing clothes. I don't want Lord Wuming's noble eyes to look at other women's bodies. Satya bit a handkerchief that she took out from somewhere with an unwilling expression. After all, Wuming had told her not to hurt Angela, so Satya couldn't do anything to her, and could only threaten her verbally. Then, Wuming took out a white robe from the golden ripples, and threw it to Angela. Put it on. To Satya's surprise, Angela was actually obedient and obediently put on the white robe. After all, Angela was particularly stubborn when it came to wearing clothes. Even if Angela was afraid of Satya, she wouldn't give in on wearing clothes. At this time, as if she saw Satya's doubts, Angela spoke. Because Sama is both steel and snake. Chapter 229. Angela stared at Wuming without blinking. Listening to Angela's words, Wuming couldn't help but remember the definition of steel and snake. Steel was born from serpents, and serpents were closely related to the earth. Whether it was the great sage equal to heaven, Sun Wukong, Perseus, or Neza, they were all related to the earth or the mother goddess of the earth. Sun Wukong was born from the earth, and was a stubborn rock. Perseus was entrusted by Athena to kill Medusa. After receiving a series of help from Athena, Perseus successfully became a hero and married the princess. Although Neza was born with mortal flesh, he later cut his bones to return to his father and flesh to his mother. After his death, his master used the lotus root to reshape his physical body. Be it growing with the land or reshaping, forging, it was a trait of the god of steel. Although the god of steel was the archenemy of Dragon Snake, The god of steel was also the guardian of dragon snake, not to mention Wyrm, who was both the god of steel and dragon snake. Steel and serpent were of the same origin. Wyrm, who had dual attributes, was the true guardian of dragon and serpent. Since that's the case, why don't you stay by my side? Wyrm asked rather cordially. But no matter how he looked at it, he looked like a kidnapper. Okay. Angela nodded her little head. Ah. That detestable little bastard actually managed to obtain the favor of Lord Wyrm. Ah, I'm so jealous. Ah. Xiaotaya bit her handkerchief hard as she screamed in her heart. Although Wyrm didn't have the ability to read minds, he could still guess some things based on Xiaotaya's behavior. Wyrm coughed and began to issue orders. Ahem. Satya, you've done well this time. You've successfully brought Angela to me in one piece. Don't mention it. This is what I should do. Seeing that Wyrm's expression had turned serious, Satya also regained her composure and answered Wyrm. Very good. I now have a new mission for you and Sebastian. Yes, Lord Wyrm. Please give me your orders. When Sebastian heard Wyrm calling for him, he knelt on one knee with Satya and waited for Wyrm's orders. The arrival of the last king may be accompanied by the arrival of other gods. When the time comes, act according to the circumstances. Yes, Lord Wyrm. Zaisha and Sebas received the order. It was not because Wyrm was afraid or anything else. After all, the last king was not weak. Even if Wyrm was very confident that he could defeat the last king, it was actually because he was confident in himself. After all, Wyrm hadn't seen the last king's strength yet. Wyrm wasn't 100% sure that he could defeat the last king, but he still had to maintain his confidence. Then, Angela, you can stay here for now. Remember, don't run around and stay here obediently. Your senior, Snake, is still in this house, so you have to get along well with her. As if he was talking to a child, Wyrm reminded Angela. Yes, Angela knows. Angela nodded like a child. This made Satya, who was at the side, unwilling to give up. She took out a handkerchief from who knows where and bit it. Lord Wyrm, she's lying to you. You don't know how arrogant this little girl is. After Satya caught Angela in the United States, she brought her to hide everywhere. There was no other way. The American Godslayer, John Pluto Smith, was too difficult to deal with. Satya was not afraid of him, but Angela was not. When Satya found Angela, she was resurrected by occult magic society and was extremely weak. Not to mention the Godslayer. Even a magician who knew some offensive magic could kill Angela. Therefore, Satya took Angela to hide everywhere. During this period, Angela was like a raging loli. Although she was very afraid of Satya, she had already done certain things her own way, such as wearing clothes. Seeing Angela being so obedient in front of Wyrm, Satya really wanted to slap her in the face. After settling Angela down, Wyrm took Satya and Sebastian out of the house. However, Wyrm did not notice that when they went out, a figure slipped out of the window of the room upstairs. Feeling the apocalyptic magic in the air, Wyrm looked for the last king. Wyrm looked at the changes around him and felt endless emotions. The flowers, plants, and trees on the ground began to gradually wither, especially the places close to the apocalyptic aura. It could be said that they were almost all withered. The barren earth began to crack, creating one fissure after another. The temperature of the ground gradually increased, and all the rivers and lakes on the ground gradually disappeared. With his good eyesight, Wyrm saw that the sea level was falling bit by bit. The originally snow-white Mount Fuji also began to emit thick black smoke. Is the ground starting to heat up? Wyrm frowned. This was not a good sign. It seems that no matter what, I have to defeat the last king as soon as possible. Wyrm began to regret summoning the last king without making too much preparations. The price was too heavy for Earth. Then there was only one thing he could do now, and that was to seize the time to defeat the last king. Then Wyrm took Satya and Sebastian to a beach. This was the place where the apocalyptic aura was the strongest. Guinevere, Lancelot, and a weary young man stood together with a masked figure wrapped in bandages. The weary young man held a holy sword similar to Excalibur in his hand. Wyrm believed that this sword and Excalibur were twins. That should be the divine blade of salvation. Wuming had heard from Guinevere that the last king's weapon was the Sword of Salvation, a divine sword that could release the thunder of salvation. Obviously, the young man holding the Sword of Salvation was the last king. As for the bandaged man, Wuming guessed that it was very likely that he was summoned by the last king. In fact, Wuming's guess was right. The bandaged man was here to help the last king. Guinevere looked at Wuming worriedly, but Wuming could see that Guinevere was a little uneasy about him. Lancelot was still in full armor, and his appearance could not be seen. "My compatriot, it seems that you are not a god of this world." The last king spoke. As expected of the last king, he could tell at a glance that Wuming was not a native of this world. "However, you are indeed Villothoranced." Just as Wuming was about to say something, the last king spoke again. Wuming keenly noticed that the trace of uneasiness in Guinevere's eyes had disappeared. In an instant, Wuming seemed to understand. "Then, my compatriot, my old enemy, let us quickly begin the slaughter. I can't stay on the ground for too long." "You know yourself well," Wuming said. Chapter 230. Wuming knew what the last king meant by, "I can't stay on the ground for too long." The last king also knew that as long as he stayed on the ground, he would cause global destruction to the earth. It could be seen from the chaos of spiritual veins all over the world that the last king brought about a global disaster. Of course, I tried very hard to avoid coming to the ground. When the last king said that sentence, Wuming seemed to think of something. "Is that why the dragon snake attribute can't wake you up from the myth?" Wuming said to himself. Wuming now understood why a series of methods couldn't summon the last king to the ground. That was because the last king was avoiding appearing, or rather, he was avoiding appearing. When there were 6 godslayers and 1 demigod on the ground, the last king had already awakened, but he didn't reach the upper limit of the last king's awakening. So the last king endured and didn't appear in the myth. When Wuming and Athena fought, although their dragon snake attribute also stimulated the last king, it was still a little short of the upper limit, so the last king didn't appear in the world. When Guinevere found the place where the last king slept, Guinevere chose the simplest, most violent, and most effective way, which was to summon the last king directly to the ground. That was what the last king couldn't resist, so the last king showed up, showing an extremely tired face. "As you can see, King of Disobedience, as long as I stay in this world for a moment longer, the world will be destroyed because of me." Steel was born from the earth, so naturally, it could absorb the power of the earth. The great sage Sun Wukong could find spiritual veins to restore his power when his power was incomplete, so there was no reason why the last king couldn't. "You must know about the ancient covenant, right?" the last king suddenly asked. "In fact, the ancient covenant was created for me, and what I hold is the most orthodox ancient covenant." Could it be? Wuming thought of a possibility. "Yes, as long as there are multiple godslayers on the ground, my power will increase." As if to verify the last king's words, the magical power in the last king's body began to rise sharply. It instantly surpassed the total amount of magic power of Guinevere, Lancelot, and the bandaged man. Even Wuming, who had almost unlimited mana, was shocked. Now, Wuming had to admit that the last king was probably the strongest enemy he had ever faced. Then the last king raised the platinum blade in his hand. "If you and the others had killed all the other godslayers before coming here, you might still have a chance of winning." Unfortunately, the platinum blade began to gather energy, and a small platinum ball began to gather at the tip of the platinum blade. "You've already lost." In an instant, the platinum energy ball shot towards Wuming. Boom. A violent explosion occurred where Wu Ming and the others were standing. Dust covered everything. Guinevere looked on worriedly, but because of their different standpoints, Guinevere and Wuming were now enemies. So Guinevere didn't do anything. A breeze blew, and the smoke was blown away, revealing Wuming and the others. Wuming stretched out his hand, and a shield-like armor with 7 purple petals appeared in front of him. Obviously, it was the armor that blocked the last king's attack. 7 blazing rings, Ro Ajax. Wuming slowly said the name of the noble phantasm. That was the pseudo-noble phantasm that Wuming created with Create Green item. This was the noble phantasm that Wu Ming had learned from Wei Gongshiro after his heroic spirit transformation. During the Trojan War, the bronze shield that was wrapped in 7 layers of cowhide was used to block the javelin of the hero Hector. Just like the rule breaker, it was a noble relic that was obtained after the sublimation of the anecdote. It was said that each petal was comparable to an ancient city wall. Crack! The row Ajax in front of Wu Ming shattered. After all, it was only a replica and the last king's attack wasn't that easy to defend against. Naturally, the row Ajax broke as well. Noble phantasm? The last king frowned. I'm sorry, but the last king may have to disappoint you. While speaking, Wu Ming took out X silver from the golden ripple. Then Wu Ming raised his right hand holding X silver and used create green item again. Golden particles gathered on Wu Ming's sword, changing the shape of X silver, and the original silver-white sword became golden. Unfortunately, I think I have a good chance of winning. What's that? Guinevere, Lancelot and the rest were shocked when they saw the sacred sword in Wu Ming's hand. That was because the sacred sword in Wu Ming's hand was too similar to the last king's divine sword of salvation. Countless rays of light began to gather on the sacred sword in Wu Ming's hand. Then, Wu Ming used the true name of the noble phantasm with both hands. Excalibur, Excalibur. Wu Ming swung his sword down heavily. Oh no! Lancelot immediately carried Guinevere and rode away on his white horse. Bandage Man also jumped lightly, and the wind carried him away. The last king did not move, and he looked at the golden torrent tiredly. The golden magical torrent rushed towards the last king, and the light and heat continued to attack him. In this world, Wu Ming, who had the identity of King Arthur, had the right to use the Excalibur. Silent Cry successfully used the create great item, and X silver to create the Excalibur. A moment later, Wu Ming stopped using the noble phantasm and swung the sword. Wu Ming looked at the ground in front of him that looked like it had suffered a natural disaster. Lancelot, who had escaped earlier, carried Guinevere and stood aside. Bandage Man was floating in the sky with the wind, and the few of them looked at the scene caused by Wu Ming's attack. The land had been plowed once again, but a shield had appeared where the last king had been standing. The last king was holding an ancient shield, blocking Wu Ming's noble phantasm. Even the ground behind the last king was defended by the last king, which created a strange phenomenon. On the dilapidated ground, with the last king as the starting point, the ground behind him was still intact. After all, the last king had stayed there for a long time, and it had caused the ground to deteriorate. It looked intact on the surface, but there was no vitality inside. Wu Ming had seen the shield that blocked the attack of the Excalibur not long ago. Aegis Shield. Wu Ming said the shield's real name. Yes, it was the same shield that Athena used during the battle between Wu Ming and Athena. Upon closer inspection, the shield looked exactly the same as Athena's shield, except for the lack of Medusa's head. Therefore, this shield should be called the Aegis. You are indeed the legendary King Arthur of Britain. You are right, this shield is Aegis. The last king's voice came from behind the shield. Chapter 231. The last king revealed himself and looked at Wu Ming. Then, a grid similar to the Manchala formation appeared behind the last king. The last king placed Aegis on one of the grids. However, the moment Aegis touched the Manchala formation, the shield turned into nothingness. Then the Manchala formation disappeared. This shield is really Aegis, the last king said again. But I'm a little confused. Why can you use Aegis? Wu Ming began to suspect the last king's identity and guessed his real name. After all, not everyone could use Aegis. I'm sorry, but I have no comment, the last king said quietly. Let's end this quickly. With that, the last king charged at Wu Ming with his divine sword. Wu Ming was not to be outdone either. He charged at the last king with his divine sword. The two began the most primitive hand-to-hand combat. Bandage Man, who was floating in the sky, saw the last king and Wu Ming fighting. He wanted to go up and help the last king, but, boom! A blazing flame rushed at Bandage Man with a sound that broke through the sound barrier. Bandage Man hurriedly used the wind to block it. I can't let you disturb Lord Wu Ming. Satya was fully armed and wore a magenta full body armor. She held a pike in her right hand, and maintained the traces of a magic formation in her left hand. She smiled at Bandage Man then, "I'll kill you first." With that, Bandage Man charged at Satya. "Ha ha 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 ha. Then come and try. Let's see if you can kill me, Nasric's strongest one-on-one combat power." With that, Satya charged at Bandage Man as well. On the other side, Guinevere and Lancelot. Lancelot put Guinevere down as he spoke. "Although I've already made a contract with my lord, now is not the time for the contract to be established. I still have an obligation to help my lord." Then Lancelot looked at the confused Guinevere. "You've been demoted to godly ancestor. Don't get involved in battles that you can't participate in." In fact, Lancelot didn't want Guinevere to be entangled with the last king and Wyrm, which was why he told Guinevere to stay here. After all, even though Guinevere had been demoted to a godly ancestor, he was still very powerful. After all, the godly ancestor of the United States, Angela, was able to fight with the American godly slayer, John Pluto Smith, and was defeated by John in the end. However, Angela had proven the power of a godly ancestor. Then Lancelot galloped over on his horse. "Uncle." Guinevere looked at Lancelot's departing figure and began to recall. In fact, before Wyrm arrived, Guinevere and Lancelot had already noticed that the last king was exhausted from the battle. Therefore, they took the opportunity to inform the last king of their thoughts. Guinevere recalled his conversation with the last king. "I see. Do you two want to enter King Arthur's myth?" the last king said. Guinevere and Lancelot were a little uneasy at the moment. After all, in the eyes of some strict monarchs, this was considered betrayal. "Actually, you don't have to ask me." The last king seemed to see their concerns and comforted them. "We are not monarchs and subjects. We are just partners walking on the same path." That's right, although Guinevere and Lancelot kept calling each other master and my lord, the three of them were just partners. Moreover, you are indeed Guinevere and Lancelot now. It's normal for you to want to return to the monarch you truly serve. The last king said calmly. However, this agreement still needs to be fulfilled. The last king said again. "If I kill him, then you will have no one to serve. Look forward to him killing me, Guinevere, Lancelot." After that, the last king didn't say anything. The timeline turned to the present. Guinevere returned to his senses and looked at Lancelot, who was about to go to support Lancelot. "Uncle, you are right. No matter what happens in the future, I am still his lordship's maidservant. I will fight for his lordship." What was loyalty? Guinevere finally chose loyalty between loyalty and love. He wanted to be loyal to the very end. "I can't let you disturb his battle, God's ancestor." Guinevere turned his head and looked at the source of the voice. A girl wearing a Greek off-shoulder dress and a garland on her head came over. "You are Lord Athena." Yes, that girl was the ancient mother goddess Athena, who once again restored her Trinity true body. Because Wyrm left the Gorgon stone on the table and specifically told Athena, Athena took advantage of Wyrm's absence and quietly followed him. In fact, Wyrm left the Gorgon stone so that Athena could protect herself. After all, Athena had just been severely injured by Wyrm. "Are you going to stop me, Lord Athena?" Guinevere looked at the approaching Athena and asked. "Can't help it. I am already his subordinate god. If my master god is in trouble, of course I will help him." Athena's serpentine eyes flashed. "Didn't you just lose to Lord Villo? You must be very weak now." Guinevere asked. "You don't have to worry about that." Athena licked her lips and smiled seductively. "I am confident that I can stall you, who has been demoted from Earth Mother to God's ancestor." "Is that so?" Guinevere took a deep breath. "Then you are Guinevere's enemy." The battle was about to begin. When Lancelot rode his white horse toward the last king and Wyrm, he suddenly stopped. An old man came straight in front of him. "Snake." Lancelot felt the urge to kill the enemy as a steel blade. "Nice to meet you. You are Lancelot, right? My name is Sebastian Dean, Wyrm's Sama's subordinate. I'm sorry to say that you can't pass through here." Sebastian bowed and said politely. "Then you shall be my opponent, Snake." Silent Cry and the last king fought back and forth, sword chi flying and mana radiating in all directions, constantly destroying the land that had already been destroyed once. as expected of King Arthur's strongest knight, Villothoranst, a man with great martial arts skills. Wuming also praised. It's the same for you. I can feel that your martial arts skills have been honed through experience. However, there was one thing that Wuming didn't say, that was Wuming felt a kind of king spirit. Chapter 232. Wuming was chatting with the last king, trying to find the last king's weakness through the conversation. Indeed, I've gone through hardships that ordinary people can't go through. In reality, it's my own choice. Your own choice? Wuming analyzed secretly. So, disobedient king, do you know why I'm called the last king and why I'm called the hero? Wuming narrowed his eyes when he heard what the last king said. That was the question that Wuming was thinking about earlier. Indeed, the last king was the existence that killed all the demon kings on the ground. In that case, the last king must be extremely powerful. However, that was unrealistic. Wuming did not believe that the last king could kill all the godslayers that had died since ancient times by relying on his martial arts alone. If that were the case, the last king would not be a threat at all. Wuming would have killed him long ago. After all, the last king must be a disobedient god. There was no god that was invincible in mythology. Even those who were close to being invincible had a fatal weakness. That was fixed. Wuming speculated that the last king had a special item or skill. The ancient covenant was a special skill. As long as there were godslayers on the ground, the ancient covenant would work. It would give the hero, the last king, the number of godslayers, a multiplier. However, merely increasing the last king's ability did not mean that he would be able to kill any godslayers. Wuming had a bold guess based on the fact that the last king had used the aegis that not everyone could use, and the Manchala formation that appeared behind the last king when he stored the aegis. You have all the god relics that the gods have given you. Wuming looked at the last king firmly and answered the last king's question. The last king smiled in response to Wuming's guess. You're right. With that, the Manchala phalanx once again appeared behind the last king. Immediately after, every grid in the Manchala square formation shone with a golden light. Under the golden glow, Wuming could clearly see all sorts of god relics of all shapes and sizes being stored in the Manchala formation. Wuming could not help but narrow his eyes. The gods created the position of the last king. In order for the last king to kill any of the godslayers, the gods gave their god relics to the last king. The god relics in the Manchala formation began to glow one after another, as if they were following the last king's words. And because of that, I became an existence that could kill any godslayer, the last king said emotionlessly. After all, the authority that the godslayers seized came from the gods, and the gods all had their own weaknesses. These weaknesses were exploited by the godslayers, causing the godslayers to kill the gods and turn their human bodies into godslayers. However, at the same time, the godslayers who obtained the authority of the gods they killed would also obtain the gods' weaknesses. Just like when Wuming was facing Perseus, he wanted to seal Wuming's authority with the light of Mitra, the master of Welslana. However, Wuming's authority was no longer Welslana's authority. Welslana's authority was combined with Meker's authority. After the elevation of Welslana's authority through Meker's relic, the god's authority had successfully turned into Wuming's relic, the 12 clones. Therefore, Perseus could not seal Wuming's authority. Meanwhile, the last king who possessed the god relics that could target all the gods' weaknesses became an existence that could suppress all the godslayers and kill them. This is one of my biggest trump cards as the last king. The last king said calmly. The last king has obtained the gate of Babylon in disguise. Wuming could not help but grumble to himself. After all, Gilgamesh's Gate of Babylon had the prototype of all the relics. All in all, the last king's Manchala Square was even more of a cheat than Gilgamesh's Gate of Babylon. The Manchala Square had all the god relics. However, there were no items that were not god's weapons in the Manchala Square. Like the 7 rings of Burning Sky, Roajax, and Rule Breaker Talisman Rule Breaker. There were no noble phantoms in the Manchala formation behind the last king. Unfortunately, I don't think you're invincible, Wuming said as he stood opposite the last king with the golden sword in his hand. As mentioned earlier, The last king was also the god of disobedience. As long as it was the god of disobedience, it would definitely have a weakness. Even Wuming had a weakness. You're right. I'm not invincible. The last king did not beat around the bush and admitted it generously. I was killed by the ancient god's layers. However, after I recovered my strength in this divine sword, I reappeared in the human world and killed the god's layers who killed me once. Moreover, I've never been so confident before. The last king closed his tired eyes as if he was reminiscing. During the ancient times, the god's layers killed the last king when he was still weak before he recovered his strength, turning him into a divine sword. Now the reason why the last king was at his strongest as soon as he was born was all thanks to Guinevere and Lancelot. Take Sun Wukong for example. When he was released, he had to find a spiritual vein to recover his strength, because of the lack of mana. The reason why the last king did not need to be like Sun Wukong was because he was the strongest steel, and also because of the Holy Grail created by Guinevere. As the strongest steel, the last king could absorb the essence of the earth for his own use as long as he stood on the ground. This was also why the earth began to lose its vitality after the last king descended. Flowers and plants withered, trees died, cracks appeared in the earth, oceans evaporated, and volcanoes began to stir. This was all because the last king had absorbed the essence of the earth. However, the most important thing was the Holy Grail created by Guinevere. The Holy Grail was an existence that provided the last king with abundant mana when he descended. In the past, he was revived with full health. Now he was revived with full health and mana. The two symbolized different things. In addition, because he was absorbing the essence of the earth, his vitality and mana were constantly recovering, making him stronger all the time. This was the reason why the last king was so confident. Moreover, the god of disobedience is only a projection of God on the earth. Even if I die once, I can continue to be a projection the next time. That's unfortunate, the last king. Wuming looked at the last king with a smile and continued. I came to this world in my true form. The last king narrowed his eyes. What Wuming meant was obvious. As long as he killed Wuming, he would not be revived. Well then, let me experience the power of the god relics that the gods have given me. Chapter 233. Wuming put down the holy sword as soon as he was done speaking. The holy sword was engulfed by the golden ripple. Subsequently, Wuming placed his hand in the golden ripple. Subsequently, the last king put down the savior sword as if he was responding to Wuming. A glow appeared in the Manchala formation behind him. Subsequently, countless god relics shot towards Wuming like bullets. Wuming analyzed the magic contained in the god relics. The last king was using the power of the god relics to cause explosive damage to the enemy. Wuming could not help but smile as he watched the familiar scene. My disciple has used this technique before. As her master, it's completely useless to me. Seeing that countless god relics were about to shoot towards Wuming, a series of golden ripples appeared behind Wuming. Walla walla. Countless golden chains whizzed out of the golden ripples with clanking sounds. The Enkidu had a special effect on divinity. Given that the Enkidu had evolved, it could fight the god relics of the gods and Buddhas in the sky. It could even suppress them slightly. Bang, bang, bang. Countless god relics collided with the golden chains, causing a series of large-scale explosions. Boom, boom, boom. The dust created by the intense explosions drowned each other. Wuming waved his hand and a magical wind blew the dust away, revealing the last king who was frowning. What do you think, last king? Do you still want to try? Wuming smirked slowly as he looked at the last king. The last king did not say anything. Instead, he used his actions to prove himself. Since the god relics did not work on Lin Huang, he would use the god relics to fight Lin Huang. That was what the last king thought. A glow appeared in one of the Manchala formation behind the last king. Subsequently, a golden longbow appeared in the last king's hand. The last king drew the bow and 9 illusory flame arrows appeared on the golden longbow. Hoi bow. As the last king shouted the god relic's real name, the 9 arrows that could shoot down the sun were shot towards Wuming. Wuming did not panic. He extended his hand and a gigantic ancient stone bow appeared in Wu Ming's hand. Wu Ming pulled the stone bow into a full moon and shouted the relic's real name. 9 lives kill 100 monsters. Wu Ming, who had analyzed the Berserker's Hercules class card, would naturally use Hercules' noble phantasm to kill hundreds of heroic spirits. After all the information of the heroic spirits were stored in the class card. Meanwhile, Wu Ming used the create green item to bring the relic back to the world. Although Hercules was a berserker, the kill 100 spirits was a bow relic. However, with the help of the great hero Hercules' skill, it was transformed into a cold weapon relic. With Wu Ming's skill, it was naturally possible for him to transform it. Moreover, by using the bow to kill hundreds of 9 lives, the damage of the noble relic had increased by quite a bit. As the pseudo-relic's real name was released, the 9 demigod arrows that killed the giant venomous snake Hydra collided with the 9 sunset arrows that were shot out from the Hoi bow. Boom! The 9 flame arrows collided with the 9 divine arrows, creating an intense explosion. Subsequently, the giant bow in Wu Ming's hand shattered. The last king frowned and put the Hoi bow away. He then took out another god relic from the Manchala formation. It was a javelin that shone like a meteor. Gungnir. The last king shouted the javelin's name. The javelin was like a meteor, piercing through the atmosphere and shooting toward Wu Ming. Immediately, the create green item light appeared in Wu Ming's palm. Wu Ming condensed the relic, and a scarlet spear appeared in Wu Ming's hand. Gibalg. The Scarlet Devil spear shot out explosively. The God King's spear that would definitely hit the enemy, and the demonic spear that would definitely hit the enemy's heart collided. The 2 weapons collided, creating sparks, and then returned to the hands of the last king and Wu Ming. Gibalg shattered when it returned to Wu Ming's hand, and the Gungnir was firmly grasped by the last king. You always make the first move. This time it's my turn. With that said, Wu Ming put his palms together and activated Create Green Item. A large amount of magical power burst out of Wu Ming's body. The last king looked at Wu Ming vigilantly. The magical power that Wu Ming exuded was comparable to the magical power of a god slayer. Then, a long red rod with a golden gauntlet appeared in Wu Ming's hand. That's Enuma. The last king revealed the true name of this weapon because the last king's Manchala phalanx also had this weapon. Although the Enuma Elish that Wu Ming took out was different from the Enuma Elish in the last king's memory, there was no doubt that it was the world sword that recreated the scene of hell before the world was created, Enuma Elish. If that's the case, I'll take it out as well. The Manchala formation behind the last king shone brightly as he spoke. A weapon similar to Enuma Elish with a golden gauntlet and a red rod appeared in the last king's hand. It happened to verify Wu Ming's speculation. Since the Savior Divine Sword was so similar to the Excalibur, perhaps all the relics in the Xingyue world had the same appearance and ability as all the god relics in this world. However, I don't believe that you can fully unleash the power of these god relics, the last king. That was right. Even the gods had their own selfish motives. Although the gods and Buddhas had given their god relics to the last king, including the Enuma Elish level god relics, there must be a limit to these god relics. Have you noticed? The last king secretly frowned. In reality, Wu Ming was right. Just like how the god of disobedience's manifestation had a restriction to weaken its power, the last king could not master these god relics at all. He was only in a superficial state. In other words, he was a layman. However, it was the same for Wu Ming. Although Wu Ming could create the god relics that he knew using Create Green Item, Wu Ming was just like the last king. He was a layman and could only use them simply. However, even if a layman was given a gun, he could kill someone. If a layman was given a mobile machine gun array that could be activated with just a button, he would be able to kill almost everyone. That was the reason why the last king said that these god relics were his trump cards. If he did not have the ability to resist or dodge the god relics earlier, he would not have been able to withstand the god relics barrage with his body alone. After snapping back to his senses, Wu Ming lifted Enuma Elish and pointed it at the last king, revealing the real name of the god relic. At that moment, the last king shouted the god relic's name. Enuma Elish, heaven and earth distortion, star of creation. Enuma Elish. Almost at the same time, two red hurricanes that tore through space collided. Chapter 234. As the red storm collided with each other, the space around them shattered like pieces of glass. Within the void fault created by the space shattering, there was only darkness. In the dark, some dark matter could be seen vaguely. When he saw the dark matter, Wu Ming's inner alarm went off. And it was also because of this warning that Wu Ming realized that he was a little addicted to the battle just now. Although it didn't affect him much, Wu Ming didn't like to be controlled by impulse. This is considered a blessing in disguise. Wu Ming thought to himself. At the same time, Wu Ming and the last king stopped using the Enuma Elish sword. Soon the broken space recovered bit by bit. The Enuma Elish sword in Wu Ming's hand shattered and disappeared. Although Wu Ming could create an Enuma Elish sword that could not be replicated, the sword could only be used as a one-time missile. If he wanted to use it again, he would have to create a new one. Moreover, the mana required to create an Enuma Elish sword was thousands of times more than the mana required to create other relics. Fortunately, Wu Ming had studied the Enuma Elish sword from Gilgamesh when he was in Uruk. He was only able to create it with the help of Kalas. Needless to say, the magic costume that Zelik made for Wu Ming was perfect for Wu Ming. If he could create it a few more times, Wu Ming might not need Kalas's help anymore. However, since Wu Ming had only created it once, he could not replicate it. As the topic changed, Wu Ming recalled the dark matter that he had seen earlier. I can't be wrong. The dark matter is the same as the black mud that Julian used. At this moment, the last king, who had put away the Enuma Elish sword, spoke. It seems like there's something outside this world. You should know about it since you're from another world. Wu Ming frowned and thought about it. Then he shook his head. I don't really know what it is. I only know that it's dangerous. After all, Wu Ming had no idea what it was that had the same aura as Wu Ming. Looking at Wu Ming's serious face, the last king chose to believe what Wu Ming said. It seems like as long as we don't open the space from the outside world, they won't be able to affect this world. That's true, but who knows if the darkness will find a way to come into this world? After all, Ariya's heart had been corroded by the darkness, and he had completely fallen to the dark side. Moreover, you and I have already opened the tunnel earlier. Wu Ming meant that the dark matter might have already come to this world. Is that so? But it's a pity that I don't want to get involved in this mess anymore. The reason why humans can slay gods and become god-slayers that are neither human nor god is because humans have unlimited possibilities. The calamities of this era will be left to the people of this era to resist. I will only do one thing, and that is to kill you demon kings that shouldn't exist in this world, then quickly go into hibernation. With that, the last king raised the sword of salvation. Wu Ming also agreed with the last king's words about humans have infinite possibilities, and the disaster of this era should be resisted by the people of this era. Moreover, even if the last king wanted to stay on the ground to protect humans, Wu Ming would not allow it. As long as the last king stood on the ground, it wouldn't take long for the entire earth to fall into desolation until it became a dead planet. It's strange, the last king. As a disobedient god and the strongest god of steel, you hate fighting so much. Wu Ming looked at the last king with some playfulness. The reason why the disobedient gods were called disobedient gods was that they were mentally abnormal and disobedient to their own myths. This also meant that the disobedient gods were belligerent. Whether it was Welslana, Mekhl, Athena, Perseus, Neza, Susanu, or even Lancelot, who was the shadow of God, these disobedient gods were all belligerent. Including the god-slayers who killed the disobedient gods, Warban, Luohao, and Salvatore. These three were the kind of people who would fight without saying a word. Although some god-slayers were not keen on fighting, such as Yarek, Matamaisha, and Hardadef, they still had the desire to fight in their bones. This was the constitution of the god-slayers that could not be changed. As the strongest god of steel among the disobedient gods, they were the most belligerent. It was like the relationship between ordinary people and a fighting race. Just kidding. Back to the topic. As the last king of the strongest god of steel, He was neither mentally abnormal nor belligerent like other gods of steel. In Wuming's opinion, the reason why the last king fought was that he wanted to sleep as soon as possible, so that the earth would not completely lose its vitality. The last king did not want to be a hero who killed the gods. If there was a chance, the last king would choose to leave his identity as a hero. Wuming was not surprised. Because of this, there was no doubt that being the last king was very abnormal. Because he was not keen on fighting, the last king sighed and then explained. That's because of my brother. As if in response to the last king's words, a black shadow appeared behind the last king, and that black shadow simply appeared and then disappeared immediately. My brother helped me shoulder everything. He shouldered all the negative mental effects that a disobedient god should have. That was why my brother could only follow behind me, always in a state of chaos, while I became like the character in the legends. That was one of the reasons why the last king wanted to sleep as soon as possible. He didn't want to see his brother help him bear the chaos anymore. But because of the influence of the earth on the last king since ancient times, the last king became so tired. So that's how it is, the last king. I probably guessed your real name. Wuming smiled. Really? So what? Come on, let's fight. The last king was not worried that Wuming would use the last king's real name to find his weakness. However, instead of saying that he was not worried, it was better to say that the last king had a glimmer of hope, hoping that Wuming could defeat him. That was what Wuming saw from the last king's eyes. The eyes were the window of the soul. That sentence was true. So, let's start the second round. Holy light and lightning intertwined as the second round between Wuming and the last king began. Chapter 235. Wuming and the last king once again began their hand-to-hand combat. The last king's divine sword of salvation was surrounded by lightning. Each of his attacks contained the lightning of salvation. Each of the last king's attacks contained supreme power. Wuming blocked the attacks with his sacred sword. Each of the attacks gave Wuming immense pressure. In the ancient times, I killed the Godslayer with my own strength and the ancient agreement. The last king began to tell the story as he fought Wuming. However, since my information was exposed, it became harder and harder to kill the Godslayer, the last king lamented. After that, the gods gave me some of their god relics. The last king kept swinging the divine sword of salvation at Wuming while Wuming blocked the attacks with his sacred sword. He continued to listen to the last king's story. Every time I killed a Godslayer, the gods would give me their god relics. Just like that, I have almost all of the gods' god relics. The last king swung the divine sword of salvation hard, forcing Wuming to retreat. Wuming, who was holding his sword with both hands, sank deep into the ground. Deep scratches were left on the ground as he was forced to retreat. The combination of these god relics formed the Manchala formation. It's the divine sword of salvation with supreme power. The last king pointed the divine sword at Wuming again as soon as he was done speaking. Zzzzzzzzz. The lightning of salvation continued to surge on the divine blade of salvation. Subsequently, the lightning of salvation was shot at Wuming like a bullet by the divine sword of salvation. Dong! A thunderous explosion was heard. The lightning of salvation hit Wuming accurately. However, the last king frowned. With the support of the ancient agreement, he could clearly sense that Wuming was not dead because the power in the last king's body did not diminish. Moreover, the last king did not believe that Wuming would be killed so easily. As expected, the glow of the sacred sword was revealed as soon as the dust from the explosion dissipated. The divine sword is indeed powerful. Unfortunately, my sacred sword is not weak either. Wuming said. A relic-level mana gathered on the sacred sword that he was holding. The sacred sword shone brightly. The last king looked at Wuming cautiously as he thought that Wuming was going to activate his relic. A large amount of mana was attached to the sacred sword, forming a layer of mana blade that was 3 meters tall. Subsequently, Wuming swung it. Although Wuming and the last king were fighting by the sea, the last king was the last king, the sea level began to drop. Putting aside the fact that Alice and the others were trying their best to stabilize the spirit vein, The water source near Wyrm and the last king was either evaporated by the last king's passive attack, or by the mana or skills released during their battle. Therefore, there was no longer a trace of water in the area. The last king waved his divine blade of salvation, and the thunder of salvation flashed, canceling out Wyrm's huge blade of mana. Fear the one with wings. Evil people and powerful people are all afraid of me with wings. My wings will bring you a curse. Evil people can't hit me. The moment he heard the words, the last king felt that his eyes were dazzled. Wyrm instantly teleported in front of the last king. Wyrm raised the 3 meters tall mana blade and swung it at the last king. The last king had dynamic vision and captured Wyrm's movements. However, being able to capture it didn't mean that he could react. The speed was so fast that it was suffocating. The heat on the mana blade was comparable to the previous Excalibur. There was no doubt that if the last king was hit by this sword, he would be seriously injured even if he didn't die. The definition of a relic was to inject mana into the relic and shout the relic's true name to release the power contained in the relic. However, Wyrm was thinking that if the holy sword was infused with magic comparable to the holy sword's noble phantasm, without calling out the noble phantasm's true name, would the power of a holy sword without releasing its true name be comparable to the power of a noble phantasm? There was no doubt that Wyrm's method was successful at the moment. Wyrm first used mana, and added a layer of 3 meters tall mana blade on the holy sword to expand the attack range of the holy sword. Then, Wyrm compressed the mana used to release a relic into the mana blade on the outer layer of the holy sword. The outer layer of the mana blade was successfully transformed into a normal attack that was comparable to the release of a relic. Swoosh! With the skills and dynamic vision that he had gained from fighting countless godslayers since ancient times, the last king successfully dodged Wyrm's fatal attack. Boom! The last king dodged, but the price was that the ground suffered another large-scale destruction. The entire coast cracked open like a turtle, and then it shattered. Now the entire ground level had been lowered, although it was caused by man-made physics. The 3 meters tall mana blade that was attached to the outer layer of the holy sword disappeared after cracking the ground. With just one attack, the mana attached to the holy sword that was comparable to a relic was instantly consumed. Although this move was quite powerful, the consumption of mana was also visible to the naked eye. Therefore, it was estimated that this move could only be used by Wyrm. The relic was the trump card of the servant, the decisive weapon that changed the outcome of the battle. Therefore, the relic could not be used lightly. In the ordinary Holy Grail War, generally speaking, the servant only had one relic, but there were many servants who had multiple relics. For the servants whose magic attribute was D level or below, releasing a relic would almost exhaust the servant's mana. If it was a C-level servant, it would be in a dangerous state. When the relic was released, if it did not achieve the expected effect, or if the opponent did not die, the servant who could not release the relic without mana was basically dead. Of course, there were also servants whose noble phantoms did not consume much mana, but that was a minority, and this kind of servant basically had a fatal weakness, so let's not talk about it for now. Then, Wyrm released his own mana and attached it to the holy sword. The last king also captured the entire process, which took less than 0.1 seconds. None of the servants could use their noble phantoms with a gap of 0.1 seconds, and it was unlikely that any servant could use their noble phantoms for more than 10 times in a row. Even if there were multiple relics, it was not necessarily the case. And there is no servant with enough mana to support all of this. Wyrm, who was in the state of lightning speed, turned in an instant and slashed at the last king. Clang! The last king, who was prepared, caught Wyrm's attack, and then immediately bounced off Wyrm. Immediately, the last king raised the Sword of Salvation, and the Sword of Salvation emitted a dazzling light. Light of Salvation, eliminate the filth. In an instant, the lightning speed and mana blade on Wyrm disappeared. Chapter 236. So that's how it is. Is this also one of the uses of the Blade of Salvation? Wyrm, who exited the seraphic speed state, held the holy sword in his hand and looked at the last king. You're right. The blade of salvation has the lightning of salvation that can purify everything in the world. This light of salvation is another use of the lightning of salvation. After sacrificing the attack, although the light of salvation doesn't cause any damage, it can purify a series of negative effects and even eliminate the enemy's power boost. It has an extremely powerful advantage. The last king held the blade of salvation with a calm face. Don't say that I'm cheating. King of disobedience, this is also a use of the blade of salvation. In this regard, Wyrm shook his head. This is also your power. Of course, I won't say anything, but Wyrm has already noticed the weakness of the light of salvation. As long as the light of salvation doesn't reach, then it can't remove the enemy's power boost. With that, Wyrm began to chant a new language. Although that's the case, as long as I cover my body with the light of salvation, you won't be able to get close to me. But then you won't be able to attack, right? Wyrm's rebuttal left the last king speechless. It can't be helped. The light of salvation is so powerful, but because of this, it must have a limit. If that's the case, then I'll use this. With that, the last king took out a metal disc covered with 2 golden sword-shaped runes. That was the authority of the last king that Guinevere has been holding, the arrowhead disc. The moment the last king finished speaking, the arrowhead disc emitted a light. The golden sword runes flashed and turned into 2 figures that flew out from it. I didn't expect to see you again, King of Disobedience. Last time, I was completely defeated. I didn't expect to see you here. I, old son, didn't have enough last time. One of them was a handsome golden-haired youth riding a Pegasus. The other was a golden-haired monkey king standing on a golden cloud and wearing golden chainmail. Perseus, son Wukong. Wyrm was now completely sure of the arrowhead's ability. Ever since Guinevere had absorbed Perseus, whom Wyrm had killed, into the Disc of Light for the first time, Wyrm had been wondering if the Disc of Light could revive the dead god of steel for its own use, since it could absorb them. This was the result. The arrowhead's disc is my omnipotent weapon. Don't say that I'm bullying you, the king of disobedience. Then, the last king spoke to Perseus and the great sage, heaven's equal. My compatriot, the proud steel, please lend me a hand. Perseus waved his long robe and got down from the white heavenly horse. He took out the weapon at his waist. There's nothing we can do about it. After all, the comrade before us is very powerful. Sun Wukong scratched his ears and smiled. Since you're willing to give me a chance to kill my enemy, I don't mind helping you. Then Sun Wukong took out the Jingu Bang from his ear. Wyrm carefully observed the 2 resurrected gods. He did not believe that the last king's disc of light could revive them completely. Then Sun Wukong and Perseus rushed toward Wyrm. Sun Wukong arrived at Wyrm's side first with lightning speed. The Jingu Bang that weighed 13,500 pounds was aimed at Wyrm's head. Clank! Wyrm blocked with his sword. Then Wyrm released the blade of magic again. The blade of magic was used by Wyrm again. Wyrm sent Sun Wukong flying. Then, a few arrows that seemed ordinary but contained divine power shot toward Wyrm. Wyrm dodged and swiftly evaded. However, sizzle, sizzle, the violent thunder of salvation hit Wyrm. The last king had predicted the trajectory of Wyrm, who was in lightning speed. Wyrm flew backward and fell to the ground. The ground suddenly exploded. The dust caused by the violent impact buried Wyrm's figure. Since you're looking for death, I won't be polite with you. Wyrm's voice was filled with anger as it came out from the smoke. Lightning! 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 I'm the conqueror who can defeat thousands with white, tens of thousands with 1,000, and tens of thousands with 10,000. Now please shine brightly for me, who is on the side of justice. Give me divine power. Supreme lightning, increase exponentially. The long and short needles in Wyrm's heart pointed to the 9 o'clock direction at the same time, activating the double incarnation state that would be unavailable for a while after using it. Countless lightning bolts as thick as buckets rushed out of the dust. One of the lightning bolts instantly arrived in front of the king closest to Wyrm. That was Sun Wukong. Sun Wukong had already been paralyzed by Wyrm's lightning aura after using double Thunder God's incarnation. I am the one who crushes all the enemies and enmity between humans and demons. That was the god of thunder's incarnation's amplification spirit, which could increase his power again. In an instant, countless lightning pillars with a diameter of 3 or 4 meters buried Sun Wukong. Aha! Sun Wukong let out a sorrowful cry. Then the resurrected Monkey King turned into ashes. At that moment, the stone plate in Wuming's heart, which represented the 9 o'clock direction of Thunder God's incarnation, emitted a red light as if a machine overheated. The lightning pillars outside also revealed Wuming's figure. Then Wuming looked at Perseus again. It's you. It's you. Perseus was shocked. After all, Wuming could easily defeat him before. Now he had turned the famous great sage, heaven's equal to heaven, into ashes. Perseus was alarmed at this moment. I will deny the sky, deny the earth, the storm will destroy everything, and the shower will cover everything. With the wind that can continue to rise until the point, combined with this supreme divine power, I will make everything in the world bow down to me. In an instant, the 2 needles that originally pointed to Thunder God's incarnation turned and pointed to the 4 o'clock direction of Thunder God's incarnation. What followed was a torrential downpour of wind. The violent wind blew away everything around Wuming, including the ground, the air, and Perseus, who was standing not far away from the last king. The storm rolled up everything on the beach and even the dry coast, soil, rocks, withered grass, rotten trees, and everything was instantly crushed by the violent wind and turned into dust, covering the sky and the earth, falling like a drizzle. This included Perseus, who had a shocked expression on his face just a second ago. At this moment, he also turned into wisps of magic and disappeared. In just a few seconds, Wuming killed the 2 enemies he had killed before. At that time, the last king, who moved because of the wind, opened his eyes, looked at the scene in front of him, and fell into silence. Chapter 237. Wuming looked at the silent last king, and smiled while wiping a few drops of sweat on his cheeks. Wuming, who was in his human form, felt a little tired after using double incarnation twice in a row. The physical burden of double incarnation was not something that anyone could bear. Wuming got his noble phantasm through his own noble phantasm. Before the noble phantasm was upgraded, the noble phantasm itself would be set according to Wuming's specific situation. As the dragon of origin, Wuming was a high-level existence. Although he was still a baby, he was still the dragon of origin. Therefore, Wuming's noble phantasm had a great suppressive ability when compared with noble phantasm of the same level. Moreover, those noble phantasms had the ability to evolve infinitely. As a god's authority, Wuming's noble phantasm was undoubtedly the most powerful noble phantasm in EX. It could be said to be the EX of EX. However, that also meant that the burden of using noble phantasm was extremely difficult for others. In terms of physical burden alone, if he revealed his true form, Wuming was confident that he could penetrate the earth with pure physical strength. Although his physical strength was reduced in his human form, his body was still strong. Let's look at his magical power consumption. Wuming, who used double incarnation twice in a row, consumed as much magical power as multiple godslayers. For a magician, obtaining the Holy Grail represented endless magical power. Even if the previous servant obtained the Holy Grail, even if he had been using noble phantasm, he didn't know how long it would take to completely exhaust the Holy Grail's magical power, and that was under the premise that the Holy Grail did not automatically restore its magical power. Take the Holy Grail made by Guinevere as an example. The last king used it as a primer to restore his magical power to its full state. Moreover, because he was standing on the earth, his magical power limit was still constantly breaking through. If it weren't for Wuming being the dragon of origin, his magical power was almost infinite. And when Wuming incarnated as a servant, his magical power storage was also EX level. If Wuming's strongest stat was his magical power, it was undoubtedly his magical power. The level of magical power completely suppressed the sum of strength, agility, durability, and noble phantasm. As for luck, although that could be expressed in data, who could say for sure? All in all, Wuming just used 2 double incarnations. At this moment, although his magical power was sufficient, That was the first time Wu Ming felt his magical power was greatly reduced. For Wu Ming, who had never felt a lack of magical power, it was really rare. Well, but it's not a big deal. I guessed it right. You are now weak, last king. Wu Ming grinned happily. Although using the arrowhead disc can summon the dead steel, I have to give them a part of my power, and as my authority to resurrect them, they only have 80% of their power. If they die in battle, you won't be able to get back the power you gave them, right? That's right, that's why the last king didn't use the arrowhead disc. The arrowhead disc summons steel at the cost of his own power. After these steel died, they would directly return to the mythical realm with this power. Therefore, the power of the last king was weakened. And killing these steel can't get the authority because these steel came from the arrowhead disc, the authority of the last king. Killing them only means that the authority of the last king is ineffective. It doesn't matter. Even if my power is weakened, I still have the sword of salvation. Moreover, I am now enough to support the power of the sword of salvation. The last king said indifferently after waving the sword of salvation twice. But you, if I'm not mistaken, you have several authorities that you can't use right now. Wu Ming frowned. Now, in addition to the incarnation representing Thunder God, which was in a red alert state, the stone plate representing Storm and Phoenix were also in a red alert state and temporarily couldn't be used. Previously, Wu Ming wanted to use double Phoenix incarnation with Blade of Mana to take down the last king in one fell swoop. However, because he was too close, he couldn't react in time, and the light of salvation from the last king's divine sword of salvation shone on him. Wu Ming's double Phoenix incarnation was forced to withdraw and entered red alert. However, Wu Ming now almost figured out the last king's routine, and he summarized several sets of plans in his mind. After thinking for a while, Wu Ming decided to implement one of the plans. Now you have almost guessed my identity. Don't you want to use your sword of spirit speech? The last king said without sadness or joy. Wu Ming just smiled at that. Although I know your identity, if I use the sword of spirit speech, your light of salvation will become a problem. Manchala phalanx doesn't work on me, and the lightning of salvation can't hurt me accurately. Now you can only limit my power with the light of salvation. So, I decided to take the simplest way. Wu Ming rushed to the last king. Thou hast violated the contract and brought sin to the world. On Sunday, the sinner shall be punished. Crush his back, dig out his bones, hair and brain, and trample on his blood and mud. If I am the one who cannot get close to the darkness, I will follow the Lord's words and destroy thee. God says human beings are sinful. God says human beings need to be purified. Thus, the torrential flood is bestowed upon me. In the name of the Supreme King, I will grant equal relief. Wu Ming's inner pointers pointed to 5 o'clock and 6 o'clock respectively. Annihilation Avatar and Flood Avatar were activated. The sea, which was almost dried up because of the existence of the last king, suddenly soared. A huge wave of tens of meters high rose from the horizon, rushing toward Wu Ming and the last king at an extremely fast speed. Is this also a power? Looking at the huge wave, Razin said calmly. When the huge wave approached the last king discovered that the color of those huge waves was dark red, the color of blood, the color of death. That was the effect of Annihilation's ability on Flood. The power of Annihilation made the huge wave, which could easily crush steel, more violent. It could be said that if Wu Ming put Sun Wukong in this huge wave, the great sage, Heaven's equal, would definitely turn into dust and disappear. Wu Ming suddenly exerted his strength and jumped to the top of the huge wave. Wu Ming was supported by the huge wave, and looked at the last king who was waiting for him. Final king, the hero who annihilates the demon king, come and try to see if you can resist this torrential flood that is mixed with the power to destroy everything. Then the last king narrowed his eyes. That's enough for the thunder of salvation. With that, the last king's divine blade of salvation exploded with a rumble of thunder, rushing towards the monstrous flood created by Wu Ming to destroy everything. Chapter 238. The divine thunder that contained the power of salvation. and the flood that destroyed everything were removed. In an instant, as if the Big Bang occurred, a violent explosion occurred at the intersection of the two. After the explosion, the rising wave summoned by Wuming disappeared. However, because of the intersection of the giant wave and the divine thunder, a large amount of white mist rose. The white mist covered the sky and the earth, and soon the sun was blocked. The last king's vision was also blocked. The rising white mist also contained the power of destruction, and the last king could not see through everything around him. So that's your plan? The last king couldn't help but smile. The white mist that contained the power of destruction blocked the last king's vision, and then waited for an opportunity to sneak attack the last king. However, your plan is too clumsy. You've exhausted all your tricks. Just wait for me to kill you, king of disobedience. With that said, the last king used the light of salvation from the divine sword of salvation, and began to purify the surrounding mist. At this moment, a figure dashed out from behind the last king. Excalibur. Wuming shouted the true name of the noble phantasm, compressed the noble phantasm that was supposed to be a light cannon into the holy sword, and slashed at the last king with all his might. However, the last king's light of salvation was instantly activated, and the magical power attached to the holy sword disappeared in an instant, leaving only a sharp and sturdy sword. Boom! Pucci! Wuming's holy sword was caught by the last king with his bare hands, and a trace of blood was drawn from the last king's palm. Wuming's body was pierced by the last king's divine sword of salvation, and a large amount of golden blood spilled from Wuming's body. In this way, you're a general, the last king said without any sadness or joy. However, Wuming smiled. The last king, do you think you've won? Wuming looked at the last king with a smile on his face. That's true. After all, regardless of whether you're the god of disobedience or the god slayer, as long as you're not completely killed, you'll definitely retaliate. As he spoke, the divine blade of salvation appeared with streaks of lightning. After all, I'm an existence that won't return until I die. Goodbye, my compatriot. The divine sword of salvation exuded an unprecedented light. There was no doubt that this blow could completely turn Wuming into flying ashes. It's time to end it. Wuming's voice came from behind the last king. Then Wuming, who had been pierced by the divine blade of salvation, smiled and turned into pure mana before disappearing. This is... The last king was shocked, and he quickly released the divine sword of salvation. But before the last king released the divine sword of salvation, Zabaniya. The last king's heart was affected by Wuming's noble phantasm. Although the last king's heart was not destroyed by Wuming's noble phantasm, the last king's eyes suddenly widened, and it was obvious that he was affected. At that moment, his movement came to an abrupt halt. Slayer, Flagelak. A light penetrated the last king's heart, and the last king spat out a mouthful of blood. Pfft! A black sphere fell to the ground, turned into flying ashes, and disappeared with the wind. Walalala! Countless chains stretched out from the golden ripples, completely binding the dying last king. That's the slash of the war god's sword. Flagelak, the last king said. Wuming, who was wearing a black robe, slowly walked up to the last king. The last king, who had been bound by Enkidu, was no longer a threat. Not only was his magic power sealed, but the effect of restraining gods had also caused the last king to fall into a state of paralysis. He could no longer feel his body. Yes, but I got it from a human. Well, a very interesting human. Is that so? Feeling his life force rapidly draining away, and his unconscious body, the last king gave up on struggling. I didn't expect that you have a doppelganger authority that even I can't see through. That's right, the Wuming, who was pierced by the last king's divine sword, was Wuming's dependent avatar. It was just a doppelganger, but that doppelganger had 100% of the original's combat power. To be on the safe side, Wuming also used double pointer on that doppelganger, so as not to let the last king see through the doppelganger. And the result was very successful. Wuming's black robe shattered and turned into a card, then the card shattered and turned into a little bit of magical power. Wuming first used annihilation and flood to cover up Wuming's dependent avatar. However, The last king used lightning of salvation to heat the flood containing destructive power into steam. Wuming thought that he might as well make use of it, and then use create green item to create Assassin Hassan Sabah's rank card, successfully hiding his aura. In fact, Wuming originally wanted to use backlight sword to kill the last king directly. After all, light of salvation could only seal skills, which Wuming saw from the previous battle. Wuming used light cannon, but the last king didn't use light of salvation. When Wuming condensed magical power on Holy Sword, the last king used light of salvation. The magical power on Wuming's sword disappeared. That just proved the limitations of light of salvation. After all, if light of salvation could seal everything, such as skills, noble phantoms and magical power, then the last king didn't need to fight Wuming at all. He could just seal and kill Wuming directly. Did you see the limitations of light of salvation? Ahem. Yes, I can't seal or eliminate the released noble phantoms or skills. Only something similar to enhanced status or magical power can be eliminated by light of salvation. It was precisely because of this that Wuming thought of using the backlight sword that he took from Bazette, yes, took from him. When the last king released light of salvation and lightning of salvation many times, backlight sword was already triggered. After Wuming played with it when he had nothing to do. Ahem, he studied it when he had nothing to do. Along with his magician avatar, he successfully maintained backlight sword's activation state. Although there was no need to release the backlight sword, Wuming still had the attitude of helping Buddha to the west. He used the backlight sword to completely destroy the heart of the last king that had been damaged by Zabaniya. You lost the last king, no Rama. Chapter 239. As expected, you've already guessed it. Rama forced a smile. Rama, from the Ramayana, one of the two large-scale epics in India, appeared as the eldest prince of the 10 chariot kings of Ayudha. He was the 7th incarnation of Vishnu. Among the 3 Indian gods, Brahma was in charge of creation, Shiva was in charge of destruction, and Vishnu was in charge of maintenance. It was the responsibility of Vishnu, the hero, to descend to the mortal world to save the world during the end of mankind. Most importantly, Rama had the experience of killing the demon king. This also meant that he was qualified to be called the hero. When Wuming saw the Manchala formation, he guessed that the last king must be a god from Indian mythology. When India was cultivating the secret arts, to prevent the demons from invading, they divided the area into circles and squares called Manchala. As the last king, the ordinary god of disobedience would not be able to take on the role. Therefore, the last king could only be from the 2 Indian epics, the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. Coincidentally, the last king had the Manchala formation which contained the god relics bestowed by the gods and Buddhas in the heavenly realm. In the Ramayana, there was also a legend of Rama obtaining various weapons from the holy immortals. Behind the last king, the one who bore the shadow of madness as a god of disobedience, was probably Rama's younger brother, the 3rd prince of Ayudha, Rashmana. The bandaged man you summoned must be the white ape Nuaman who helped you defeat the demon king Rabona. This was also the reason why the bandaged man was covered in bandages and wore a mask on his face. Once people find out that the bandaged man is a white ape, the first thing they would think of would be the divine ape who helped Rama defeat the demon king. In that case, your identity would be exposed. Therefore, the white ape Nuaman disguised himself with bandages and a mask. He didn't even say a word so that you wouldn't be exposed. Rama, who was tightly bound by the Enkidu, did not say anything. His life was about to end. You're tired of being the last king, aren't you, Rama? Wuming suddenly asked. That's right. Whether it was from Rama's tired eyes at the beginning, or the way he kept providing information to Wuming, Wuming could tell that Rama hoped that Wuming could kill him. This killing was to kill the last king, not Rama himself. Rama knew that Wuming was a god from another world. This gave Rama, who had given up on the identity of the last king, a glimmer of hope. That's right. I'm really tired of this life of constant battles. Exhaustion appeared in Rama's eyes as he spoke. Rama would not die completely after being killed. He had the absolute immortality of the strongest steel. The so-called killing of Rama, was actually pushing him to the brink of death. After pondering for a moment, Wyrm spoke to Rama. I don't know if I can free you from the curse of the last king. After all, I don't know anything about curses. After defeating the demon king Luobona and saving Sito, Rama sneak attacked and killed the enemy monkey Pali in order to save his own monkey Pali. Pali's wife cursed Rama because of this. Even if you save your wife, you won't be able to enjoy the joy of reunion with your wife. Being trapped in the identity of the last king, and having to fight against the demon king on the surface, Rama would not be able to enjoy the joy of reunion with his lover Sito. However, I'll try my best to do so. After all, I hope that you won't wake up. Hearing this, Rama smiled in relief. I hope you can succeed, my comrade. Also, my former companions, please treat them well. Rama disappeared. Before he disappeared, he left behind a sentence that baffled Wyrm. Rama's physical body turned into magic power and disappeared. However, the divine blade of salvation in his hand did not disappear with Rama. Instead, it fell to the ground. Wyrm looked at the divine blade of salvation and fell into deep thought. On the other hand, Numan, Lancelot, and Guinevere were forced to separate from Zaisha, Sebastian, and Athena due to the flood that was filled with destructive power. Although it seemed like Wyrm had taken quite some time to kill Rama, in reality, it only took a few minutes for Rama to be killed. From the time his clone attracted Rama's attention to the time his backlight sword was activated, Wyrm had used his assassin relic to delay Rama's movement. One of the two powerful and distinct auras of Wyrm and Rama disappeared. Almost everyone around them noticed it. As the fog in the sky dispersed, Numan sensed that his companion and master, Rama, had left. He spoke for the first time. Has my lord been defeated? If that's the case, there's no need for me to stay on the surface. As he spoke, the bandages on Numan's body were torn apart. The mask on his face cracked, revealing a body of white fur and an ape's face. Subsequently, Numan transformed into a gust of wind and disappeared. The white ape Numan had returned to the myths. The moment Numan returned, a pike that resembled a pipette pierced through the air. Damn it, come back here. Let's fight again. Zaisha waved the pipette in a rather irritable manner. Satya, who had originally wanted to take down Numan and make a contribution, realized that she couldn't catch him at all during the fight. Numan rode the wind. Regardless of whether it was his speed or explosive power, he wasn't inferior to Zaisha. Although Numan couldn't defeat Zaisha, Numan's harassment tactics and explosive power were enough to make her feel aggrieved. After all, Zaisha wasn't a patient person. Nearby, Sebastian glanced at the irritable Zaisha and shook his head helplessly. Madam Zaisha, our mission is only to hold them back for Lord Wyrm. There's no need to kill them. Of course I know that. But if I kill the enemy, Lord Wyrm might reward me, such as a room at night. With that, Zaisha's face flushed as she fell into a fantasy. Instead of looking at Zaisha, Sebastian looked at Lancelot, who had transformed from the shadow of God into the god of disobedience. Your master has already been defeated by Lord Wyrm. Do you still want to continue fighting? Because Sebastian's mission was only to hold Lancelot back, even Lancelot, who had transformed into the god of disobedience, couldn't take down Sebastian in a short period of time. Lancelot rode his white horse and held his pike. After a moment of silence, he shook his head. I have already made an agreement with my beloved daughter. As long as Lord Villo wins, I will follow my beloved daughter, and choose to follow Lord Villo. Wise choice, Sebastian said, then turned around and left. It's time to go, Madam Zaisha, Sebastian called out, releasing Zaisha from her fantasy. On the other side, Guinevere and Athena had stopped fighting. Lord Villo, did Lord Villo win? Guinevere asked excitedly. After all, for Guinevere, who had found his true love, awakening the last king had become an obsession. Therefore, between the last king and Wyrm, Guinevere was biased towards Wyrm. As expected of someone from my origin of fate, a mere godly ancestor can only be attracted to you. Athena smiled at Guinevere, who was looking at Wyrm excitedly. They all came to Wyrm's side at almost the same time, but because of their previous relationship, they were divided into three groups. Guinevere and Lancelot stood to the left of Wyrm, Zaisha and Sebastian stood to the right of Wuming, and Athena stood in front of Wuming. Athena looked at Wuming, who was holding the divine blade of salvation, and her eyes, which were filled with wisdom, flashed. Athena spoke. People of the origin of fate, are you trying to replace Rama's identity and become the final king? Chapter 240. Athena lived up to her reputation as the goddess of wisdom. She could tell what Wuming was thinking with just a glance. That was right. Wuming was indeed thinking of replacing the last king with the savior sword in his hand. Wuming had tried to destroy the savior sword earlier. Without a doubt, Wuming had failed. Guinevere had told Wuming that the savior sword could not be destroyed. Therefore, on a physical level, Wuming could not send Rama back to the mythical level. If it's my real body, I should be able to destroy the savior sword that has the indestructible attribute. Wuming mumbled to himself when he could not destroy the savior sword. Wuming, whose roots had grown in the moon world, was close to maturity. He could do things that were out of the norm. That's making a mountain out of a molehill. Therefore, Wuming had the idea of replacing the last king with himself. Rama is in a state of suspended animation with the indestructible attribute of the strongest steel. The savior sword and the last king are one. Moreover, it's a combination of the god relics from the heavenly realm. Of course, you can't destroy it, Athena said while shaking her head as if she could read Wuming's mind. Do you know the identity of the last king? Wuming looked at Athena in surprise. Meanwhile, Athena's snake-like eyes moved slightly as a smile appeared on her pretty face. Oh, didn't I tell you that I know the last king's real name? Wuming was helpless. Athena's smile was clearly the smile of a successful prank. Subsequently, Wuming sighed and said, So, do you have a way for me to replace Rama as the last king? Athena put away her mischievous smile and put on a serious face. If it's you, I do have a way. However, you'll have to rely on your lover over there. Athena then pointed at Guinevere, who was standing on Wuming's left. Wuming suddenly understood. I forgot that as the maid of the last king, Guinevere must know the last king very well. Wuming looked at Guinevere. But at this moment, Guinevere seemed rather timid. What's wrong, Guinevere? Wuming asked concernedly when he saw that something was wrong with Guinevere. Looking at Wuming, who treated Guinevere as one of his own, Guinevere asked in confusion. Why King you, Lord Villo? Guinevere was getting agitated. To be able to ignore your hostile behavior and continue to treat you as one of us, right? Wuming spoke the words that Guinevere found hard to say. Guinevere looked at Wuming with tears in his eyes. Lord Wuming. As expected, Lord Villo is still the same Lord Villo. No matter which world you are in, you won't change. Lancelot was wearing thick armor as he stood behind Guinevere and comforted him. Wuming felt that he could be honest about the other world. As for what Rama said about me being a god from another world, he was right. However, when I came to this world, I could be said to have merged with myself. After all, Wuming couldn't say that it was because he came to this world that this world changed because of Wuming and automatically added Wuming's identity into the myths. Wuming then smiled at Guinevere and Lancelot. Although I lost most of my memories due to some reason, I still remember you. Just like Guinevere, she looked exactly the same as the Guinevere Wuming knew in Camelot. The only difference was that one was older and the other was younger. Moreover, the Guinevere in the moon world was also a magician who knew some magic. Just like the Guinevere in this world, they weren't good at fighting. However, Wuming wasn't sure about the Lancelot in this world. After all, the Lancelot in this world never took off his helmet and thick armor. Wuming didn't know if the Lancelot in this world was similar to the Lancelot in the moon world. They should be different people. After all, this Lancelot's behavior is completely different from the Lancelot I know. Wuming thought and looked at Lancelot awkwardly. Is there anything else, Lord Villo? Lancelot saw Wuming looking at him and asked. It's nothing. Actually, I just wanted to ask, is the agreement between you and the last king that you will follow me if I kill the last king? Wuming regained his senses and quickly changed the topic to avoid awkwardness. That's right, Lord Villo, or rather, my Lord King Arthur, my beloved daughter, Guinevere. will return to the king's side as Queen Arthur. As for me, I will follow my beloved daughter as the king's knight of the lake, and return to the king's side. I beg the king to promise." As he spoke, Lancelot knelt on one knee and kowtowed before Wyrm. Guinevere also looked at Wyrm expectantly. "Queen. Lord Wyrm's queen," Satya muttered with lingering thoughts as she stared at Guinevere. Guinevere stepped back in fear. Sebastian, on the other hand, did not care. After all, it was not impossible for him to have a few more mistresses. Wyrm looked at Guinevere's young body and her cute face that was frightened by Satya. He touched his face awkwardly. After all, kidnapping a lowly was illegal. Yes, it was illegal. Important things had to be said twice. Moreover, Wyrm was more concerned about King Arthur's identity. Although the legend of King Arthur in this world was set as Guinevere's creation based on the Vilo, Wyrm, who knew King Arthur, felt that it was strange. However, he had to accept reality. "Get up first, Lancelot." Wyrm adjusted his tone and spoke with the spirit of a king. "As you wish, my lord." Lancelot stood up and wanted to stand on Wyrm's side, but he was stopped by Wyrm. "Wait a moment. I haven't killed the last king yet." Wyrm raised the blade of salvation in his hand. "Guinevere." Wyrm looked at Guinevere. "Your concubine is here." Guinevere bowed slightly and spoke like a lady from a noble family. Wyrm sweated when he heard the words, "your concubine." However, Wyrm subconsciously chose to ignore these details. "Can you help me become the last king?" "Your concubine will do her best." Guinevere looked at Wyrm with fighting spirit. "It feels like I'm raising a daughter." "Then let's begin, Athena." Wyrm stabbed the blade of salvation into the ground. Then Wyrm looked at Athena and smiled apologetically. Athena smiled and went to Guinevere's side and said something. Guinevere's face instantly turned red. "You're tuning in to the Lee May's Sword of Destiny YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.